He once appeared on a radio show quite randomly. I was just driving down the road and I was listening to it was just years ago, a different channel, and they said, and with us now is the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and of course you still, Mr. President, all this, and I thought, I said, really? And he wasn't talking about it. He'd written a book he wrote books, didn't he, as well?
Yes.
And I just thought, I'm going to try and get this guy on. And we've got it so far. And they said, oh, yeah, he'll probably come on and talk to you. And we never pursued it. We should have done. Now he's dead.
Frost Nixon or Carter.
Collins Carter.
I would have gone with Carter Collins, but you clearly think Collins is more important.
Collins is a team of lawyers, probably the people that put that writ together for Liz Truss. I've got Carter Collins on the case. Peter's next. News at 4.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. It's Thursday afternoon. It's Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you very much indeed for your company. There's lots to talk about this Thursday evening, and if you're on your way home, you might just be wondering about the nation's finances. We're going to get a good explainer of what on earth is going on from Nicky Morgan, who's the former Education Secretary, Baroness Morgan. She also knows her sums. She was chairwoman of the Treasury Select Committee. There's just been this almighty row today in politics about where the economy is, the price of debt, and what that means for you and me, because the value of the pound has gone down. We'll talk as well about the UK financial sanctions plan to be used on foreign people smugglers. Is that going to work? Flu-mageddon. There's a lot of flu around. Maybe you've got it yourself. We'll talk to Harry Cole as well, political editor of The Sun, about never mind the ballots. That's over on Talk's YouTube page right now. And should we take back Shamiha Begum? My answer is no. What's yours? We'll talk to Simon Diggins about that a little bit later on. Also, the LA fires, the fires that have seen many people, many ordinary people and many celebrities losing their homes. People like Paris Hilton, people like Billy Crystal, they've lost their homes. There are all sorts of worries about how quickly that has spread. Who's to blame for it? Well, according to one pro-Gaza activist, it's the Jews. yes, really, the level of anti-Semitism is off the charts. We'll be talking to the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Maud, about that a little bit later on. As always, I want your views on absolutely everything we're talking about today. This is my show, but it's your show too. Give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. Jodie's on the phone today. Have a chat with her, make your point, and we'll get you on between now and 7. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell on Twitter, or X as no one calls it. You can also send me a voice note or a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. So when there's a very big issue, when there's something that really should be debated in the House of Commons, the opposition parties can put forward what's called a UQ, an urgent question. That's what the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, did today, because he's really worried about what's going on in the economy. I'm really worried about what's going on in the economy. And Mel Stride had this message for Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Where is the Chancellor? It is a bitter regret that at this difficult time of these serious issues, she herself is nowhere to be seen. Mr. Speaker, in the last 48 hours, borrowing costs have reached a 27-year high, and it is the Chancellor's decisions that have led us here.
The Chancellor failed to show up. She sent her deputy, who's a guy called Darren Jones. He's Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He defended Labour's record.
He talked about the debt burden this country has. Maybe we should just reflect a little as to why we have so much debt. It's because pre-pandemic, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the burden of debt inherited by this government from the party opposite from 2010 onward, why did the last government have to borrow so much money every single month, not just to invest, but to pay the day-to-day bills? Because of an absolute failure to get growth into the economy. They could not make the numbers add up. They've stacked up the country's credit card. They've left it to this party to deal with, and we are going to deal with it. That is why these fiscal rules are non-negotiable. That is why public spending will be within the numbers set out at the budget. We're starting the spending review now. It will conclude in June. Public services will have to live within their means. The Chancellor has been very, very clear about that. And that's why, with this government, you get economic stability, absolute clarity on public spending, and that is why the British people trust this party and booted that lot out of office.
So Darren Jones there speaking, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Deputy Chancellor basically. He is saying that Labour has brought economic stability back. Well, it's about 10 weeks since the budget, and to me, it doesn't feel that way. Let's speak to an expert, Baroness Morgan, Nicky Morgan, former Cabinet Minister in a couple of different portfolios, culture and education. She knows her sums too. She was chairwoman of the Treasury Select Committee. Nicky, thank you for joining me today. Is there economic stability?
Well, good afternoon, Peter. Look, I think we can all just sense, what's happening in the markets at the moment. Broadly, if it's starting to cost the government more to borrow the money they need to pay the bills, then that is not stability. And despite the fact that the new government rightly said they wanted growth, we all want to see growth in the economy. That benefits everybody. There's no doubt that some of the measures taken, particularly employers having to pay more national insurance contributions for the people they employ, is having an impact, both in terms of people's plans for expanding their business, taking on more employees, and of course, unfortunately, as we can see sometimes, letting people go because they just can't afford those employment costs. And all of that then contributes to that feeling of instability that you have talked about, and the fact that the economy is not, it had started to grow over the summer, and then that growth appears to have stalled. So yes, I think this is concerning. It's very different from the period of 2022. If you remember the Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget, different causes, but of course it's not the start to 2025 that Rachel Reeves would want.
So what are those causes? Because Darren Jones earlier on talked about global instability, global causes. Are they global? Are they to do with the budget that happened about 10 weeks ago? Are they a bit of both? What are the reasons for this instability, Nicky?
Well, I think you're right in a way. It is a bit of everything. There's no doubt there is a bit of global instability. I mean, I think just because we're waiting, aren't we, for President Trump to start his time in office, and so these bond yields, which basically means, as I say, it's becoming more expensive for governments to borrow money. It applies in the US as it does in the UK. But there's no doubt there are UK factors at play here. So the budget, as I say, the fact that the employer national insurance contributions becoming more expensive for businesses, that's a huge thing. I mean, the Chancellor has spent a long time before the election courting business, telling businesses you can trust us, we're all on the same side. And at one stroke, that meant that businesses felt less confident. And people might think, well, you know, what does that matter to me? Well, at the end of the day, people want jobs. They want businesses to be spending money. If you have successful businesses, that works throughout the economy. And there's no doubt things like, obviously, increased energy prices. We know that there's a continuing pressure on household bills. So there are UK factors. There are global factors too. I think just more broadly, one of the reasons that it's become more expensive to borrow is because investors are worried about continuing inflation. And as we know, that had a big impact on the US election. You know, angry US electors saying, we're fed up with paying more for our everyday goods. We're going to try and have a new president. And basically, that was kind of what happened here in the UK, where people said, we're fed up with the Conservative government. We want to change. We want to have a change of government. They come in with big promises. And then I think people undoubtedly are feeling, well, actually, we haven't seen those promises bear fruit.
What do you expect Rachel Reeves to do now? She's heading off to China. Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform UK, MP for Boston Skegness, he has said that she shouldn't go to China. I think that's happening on Saturday, and stay here because of the economic instability. What does she do? What should she do? Should she cut public spending? Should she do something about borrowing? What would be the methods, the tactics and what's at her disposal? What can she do, I suppose, as well to arrest this, especially if there are other elements that are beyond her control?
So one of the big things about the financial markets is about confidence. And I think that, I personally think that actually the Chancellor, any Chancellor, does the right thing by going around the world and saying to international investors, look, the UK is open for investment. We want you to come. We want you to spend your money here, grow your businesses. Of course, China itself is controversial because many people say, well, actually, hang on a second, we shouldn't be doing business with China. They are a threat to our national security. I mean, I happen to be one of those people that thinks you can't ignore them, but you have to have your eyes very wide open when you're doing any deals with them. And frankly, if the Chancellor did cancel her trip, then I think that would send a message to the markets that, you know, she was even more worried than we suspect that she might be about what's happening. And I think what's really interesting about the clips that you played, particularly from Darren Jones, the deputy chancellor, as you called him, is that he needs the financial markets to hear that message, which is basically the government is going to live within its means, it's going to stick to its announced policies. And one of the other things we've heard in the last 24 hours, the government saying, well, look, we may have to cut public spending further rather than putting taxes up further. And that's difficult. And that'll be very difficult for government ministers in all sorts of departments to hear, but also anybody else who relies on government spending money, you know, with their business, investing in their schools, investing in their charities, investing in universities, investing in the health service, which, as we know, is under massive pressure at the moment. So the answer is there isn't an easy thing for her to do. I do think she has to say it's business as usual, and the government has to say we're going to listen, we're going to stick to our plans, but you know, we're going to go all out for getting growth in the economy.
Just in regard to the nature of the economy, I just want to ask you about one of your former cabinet colleagues, the former Prime Minister Liz Truss. In his post on her social media accounts, she had this message for Labour on the economy about her own record.
Rachel Reeves has pushed this country to the brink of economic crisis through high taxes, high regulation, and disastrous net zero policies. When I tried to fix these problems back in 2022, I was undermined by the economic establishment, and I was forced to reverse the policies before they were even implemented.
We also know that Liz Truss has sent what's called a cease and desist letter, a legal letter, to Keir Starmer, who has accused her on numerous occasions of crashing the economy. Quite a few other people have done that too, including me, because it's true. Nikki, what do you make of this and this threat from Liz Truss?
Well, I mean, I clearly think she's very defensive about the accusations that are made to her. But the reality is that the economy was in, after that mini budget, very bad shape in 2022. And one of the reasons, well, there were twofold, really. One was that the announcements were very unexpected, if you remember. I think, whilst I think this current government has massively overdone this talk of a big fiscal black hole, and they themselves haven't helped all of this. If you remember, there was almost no preparation by the Liz Truss government for the announcements they then made in their budget. And one of the other things they did was they didn't ask the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility to prepare the numbers. And the point is, you do need that independent set of numbers. Now, the current government did do that. We'll see more of those numbers again, refreshed in March. And I honestly think, unfortunately, for those of us who have been politicians or who are, you have to have broad shoulders. And I think, there's a way for Liz Truss to make her case, but I doubt very much it's on social media. And I doubt that a cease and desist letter is going to stop Keir Starmer saying what he said.
Another big beast of the political world is Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He has set out his views, quite surprising views, certainly in regard to what Keir Starmer has been saying for the last few days about an inquiry into the grooming gangs scandal. Let's see what he has been saying.
In my view, the government was right to reject that form of opportunism. But I did hear last night, coming out of that debate, ministers saying they are open to discussing issues now with survivors. And I will have my voice into this and say, I do think there is the case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned and the one we've seen in Rotherham, the one we've seen in Telford, to draw out some of these national issues and compel people to give evidence who then may have charges to answer and be held to account. That is something I couldn't do at my level.
Andy Burnham there, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, going against what Keir Starmer said, talking about a national inquiry. Nikki, what do you think? Is he right?
Well, I think it's interesting what he was saying about there are things that he can't do and that a local inquiry can't do. I mean, I'm afraid this is the danger with having, independently minded, democratically elected mayors. They're going to disagree with the government, even if it's the same party. And I suspect Andy Burnham feels quite strongly because obviously a lot of the issues have happened in and around Greater Manchester. And I think I'm more struck, if I were him, I think I would probably, and all of them, I think I would be looking at the Alexis J inquiry, the big national inquiry that did happen. Yes, it was broad, but as she said, there were 22, I think, recommendations, none of which have been implemented.
Although it only mentioned Rotherham once in all of what it said. Those 20 recommendations, the Conservatives said they'd accepted 18 of them, but didn't implement them in 18 months after Alexis J delivered the report.
I know. Well, and there's no, look, I'm sure that they're not simple recommendations. And, if these things were simple, they'd have been done. But the point is, even though it mentions Rotherham perhaps only once, there will be lessons there for what has happened in Rotherham. And I think the focus, the difficulty is you have more and more inquiries and the focus then moves away from actually helping victims and potential victims to the inquiry. So I understand Andy Burnham and what he is saying. Well, I understand actually why Westminster has got, so sort of focused on this, because it is an important issue. And I think it goes to the heart of people's, often feeling quite uncomfortable about things. But equally, I think what people really want to see is delivery on the ground. And so if those 18 out of 22 recommendations can be accepted and near to delivery, I'd get that done first and then perhaps listen to Andy Burnham, what he can't do and say, well, what's left that actually another form of national inquiry, task force, whatever it might be, could actually then hope to learn take some further actions.
Nikki Morgan, Baroness Morgan, thank you very much for joining us on Talk Drive today. A lot of common sense spoken by Nikki Morgan there. Tell us what you think. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to tell us what you think Nikki was saying there. Also, a plan that Keir Starmer does want to smash one kind of gangs, he tells us anyway, financial sanctions to be used on foreign people smugglers in a bid to cripple the networks. But are those financial sanctions actually going to work, especially when you're dealing with criminals? How can you properly get that done? We'll talk to Ralph Schulhammer, who is my favourite guest, after the break. Stay with us.
to one of Keir Starmer's speaking to sort of Downing Street people before Christmas, and they reckon the Prime Minister genuinely thinks there's a 1 in 3 chance, 3 to 1 chance, so 25% chance that Nigel Farage is going to be the next Prime Minister. And you just think, if that's what that's
so the Prime Minister thinks that.
I mean, it's pretty. Yeah, they think he's going to be up against. He thinks he's going to be up against a right-wing populist force.
Yeah.
He just doesn't know who it's going to be yet. Either it's going to be Reform, and they keep their act together. They've been pretty good.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk indeed. Thank you so much for everybody who has got in touch, including Chris, who says, "Afternoon, Peter. It made me laugh on Reeves's puppet." I think he's referring to Darren Jones there, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, who said, "The Right Honourable Darren Jones." To you, Chris. Is he right? Is he honourable? Let me know. Made me laugh when Reeves's puppet said, "What they're doing shows why the British people like them." Looking at Reeves yesterday, she looked as if she had not slept. So if she's doing so well, why does she look so old? I don't really like commenting on people's appearance, to be honest, mainly because sometimes people comment on my appearance is not very nice. But yeah, look, Rachel Reeves has a major job to be done, serious job to be done here. And is she doing it? I don't think so. The budget has not landed well. It has not done good things for this economy, and that's what it's meant to do. Labour will say, look, there are, tough decisions that need to be made and so on, but I'm just not sure they're the right ones. Jay's been in touch and says, why are we borrowing money to give it away? The first thing with debt management is to stop immediate non-essential bills. We can't give away GDP if we are in debt. Pat says Labour are going towards dictatorship. They're racing towards making British people poor. Adam says, so up till now we haven't been freezing the assets of the people smuggling gangs, says Adam. Well, apparently not, but David Lammy, fear not, David Lammy's got it covered. He's in charge. He is going to smash the gangs. It's all going to be fine. The Celebrity Mastermind contestant and Foreign Secretary has sorted it out. All will be well. This is what he had to say in a speech earlier today.
Two domestic priorities of the British people that cannot be solved without work abroad: tackling irregular migration and boosting economic growth. On irregular migration, the FCDA is critical to trying to solve this issue. A realistic strategy involves transactional, hard-headed diplomacy, so together that we can strengthen borders, smash the gangs, and get those with no right to be here returned to their countries.
David Lammy there, the Foreign Secretary. He says that this world-first policy will see financial sanctions used in organised crime and terrorist imposed on boat kingpins in a bid to cripple the networks. Is it going to work? Ralph Schulhammer is a political theorist. He's also a professor in Budapest. Ralph, my favourite guest, back on Talk. Great to have you here. I mean, how do you target people's financial assets when they're criminals? I mean, surely it's their job to keep it secret, their assets. I mean, is this possible? Do you think this plan can work?
No, generally, I think the means are definitely there, right? We had similar discussions in Austria about anonymous bank accounts and what can be done and how the state can get access. But I think the big issue is always, and that's true in the United Kingdom as it is in continental Europe, is that, of course, very often we have created systems, high tax burdens, a high regulatory state, where a significant number of people, depending on where they are and what options they have, that they probably will opt for a life of crime or a life in the shadows, as they say, because you simply can keep more of the money that you make. And I think this is not just true in the UK. I think this is not just true in continental Europe. This is a problem all over the West. If you tax honest labor up to the hilt, then more and more people will look for dishonest labor. And I think this is a little bit what we're currently seeing.
We've seen as well that foreign criminals here in the UK are going on crime sprees after avoiding deportation. They're responsible for 40,000 crimes in just 4 years. There are lots of people who will say, why can't we deport these people? What is the law around this? How does this actually work? And the fact that even when we try to deport some of these people, they laugh in our face and just come back even if we do send them home.
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing, and that's something I would argue that started a little bit in the 1960s. This, what I would call a therapeutic approach to public policy. So if crime happens, it's no longer that you just have to crack down on crime and prevent it from happening. It is more that you have to understand the criminal, right? What is the motivation behind the individual that does something? And don't get me wrong, that's definitely interesting, and I'm sure that social scientists should look into this. But overall, the main obligation of the state, of the government, of the police is not to do some kind of sociological study or deep psychological therapeutic work. They have to take care of security and safety within communities and in the public spaces. To be quite frank, I'm sure there are reasons why somebody is, robbing a bank, stealing from a grocery store, you name it, right? I'm sure there are some reasons why this is going on, but at the end of the day, what most people want is for this not to happen. Period. That is the problem. That is the issue that needs to be resolved, and not some therapeutic approaches. Why do people do things that they do?
It's interesting just with the human traffickers particularly. This new regime of sanctions is going to allow ministers to freeze the bank accounts, property and other assets, including those responsible for sending tens of thousands of small boat migrants across the channel. They're also going to be publicly named for the first time. If you were a trafficker, would you be afraid of these sanctions, or would you just say, well, whatever, do your worst?
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. I think the reaction will be, to quote you, is going to be whatever, because we heard all of this in the past. We heard it in every European country that, we're going to crack down, we will have more punishment, it will be harder. There is this framework that has been established, and this is something we probably at some point have to have a longer conversation about, right? Of human traffickers, of NGOs, of wannabe do-gooders, of governments that turn blind eyes. So there is this kind of entire industry, if you want. Some of it legal, some of it illegal, some of it in the gray area, that has been built up around human trafficking, human smuggling, and migration, both of the legal and the illegal kind. We just recently had this debate in the United States, right, with Donald Trump and Elon Musk about these H-1B visas, which is a similar story where there is a lot of fraud and a lot of abuse. But the ultimate point, I think, that always stands is the United Kingdom has been a country that more or less single-handedly ended global slave trade. A country that once was able to do that should also be able to get a grip on illegal migration or human trafficking of whatever kind. But it takes political will. And it takes, I think, in many ways, hard, and I use this word advisedly, punitive measures. Again, we do this therapeutic thing once again. Why do traffickers do what they do? Why do people leave the countries? Why is this? I don't care, right? People want the consequences of these policies to stop. And I think this is, once again, this must be the guiding star of whatever is going to happen.
Is it not an idea to understand those motivations to some degree? At least you can then diagnose the problem, although it could very easily be argued we know what the problem is. There are too many people arriving on our shores here in the United Kingdom. You know the score right across Europe, because that's your area, Ralph. I know you study this both from a historical and political science perspective. And actually, the movement of people is going to be here to stay. So how do we deal with it?
Oh, no, I think you're absolutely right. And of course, we should look at this in the background as well. I don't think that one thing excludes the other. But I don't want to shift the topic, but this is something, and by the way, Peter,
feel free to shift the topic, Ralph.
Well,
I'm always interested in what you have to say, no matter what it's about.
Because I have to compliment both you and talkTV, because I think in recent weeks on many issues, you really took the right side, both morally and factually, on many issues. But if you look, for example, what has been currently going on with the entire debate now about grooming gangs, rape gangs in the United Kingdom, I'm sure there will be many interesting sociological studies. Why did things happen in the way that they happen, right? Why did the police turn a blind eye? Why is it particularly, why are the perpetrators particularly men from a certain cultural background? I'm sure there are many reasons and many interesting explanations, but at this point, these things have to stop. And the same, I think, for me is true with illegal immigration or with mass migration as it currently happens. There are many interesting factors to be looked at, and I'm looking forward to all the publication and studies that will be produced.
Are we blinded by that, Ralph? Are we blinded by that and we say, well, let's have a look at this motivation, rather than simply saying, for example, with those rape gangs, those paedophile gangs, this is wrong. with immigration, this shouldn't happen, this isn't good, people are dying, and it's a tremendous pressure on the system, and it's taking rights away and taking standard of living, lowering the standard of living of people who've paid into the system and lived here all their lives. Is it, I mean, why is it, do you think, maybe this is a postmodern argument, I don't know, but why is it that not just politicians, but lots of people can actually not just call a spade and say, look, this is wrong and we need to fix it?
No, I think you're 100% right. This is part of the postmodern condition. The assumption is, and this has permeated so many parts of the West, is that there is a technical solution, if you want, to every problem, and that everything that goes wrong is because the system has failed someone, right? Whether it's then discrimination or economic hardship or you name it, it's always something that the system has done to an individual. We no longer believe, and I think that is a mistake, that there are good people out there, many of them, by the way. I think there are many, many good people out there, but there are also evil people out there. There are people who take pleasure in hurting others. There are people who have, a sociopathic or psychopathic streak, and not everybody can be, therapeutically
rehabilitated,
supervised to become, precisely. So this is something that is going on. As I said, what the reasons are for this, were they mistreated as children or whatever it then is, was there lead in the water supply, whatever it then at the end of the day is, it's almost irrelevant. When it comes to solving the problem at hand. But I think this is this idea that if somebody does something evil, it can only be the consequence of this individual having been failed by the system.
There are just bad people.
Yeah, there are. I mean, this is and you get, and this is, by the way, another thing. And the thing you do against having bad people is, to quote William Wilberforce, right, to play such a significant role in the abolishment of the slave trade, is also kind of to reform morality. Like, we need, I know this sounds so old-fashioned, but I think we have to become more moral again. There are so many things out there that we started to accept, right? It's not just, it's the grooming gangs have been one story, but another one is also when you have young girls who want to break world records of sleeping with 1,000 men in a day. Like, those are different symptoms of a decaying culture, of a declining civilization. And we have to push back against this.
Ralph, thank you very much indeed. You speak so much sense as always. Ralph Schulhammer, their political theorist. He is head of the Centre for Applied History at the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Budapest. He was in Vienna previously. Thank you to him. Thanks also to Stephen Millings in Belfast, who said there should be no inquiry into the rape gangs. It will run for years, cost millions, and the thick file of recommendations will be ignored. There's enough current evidence for prosecutions. How on earth can an inquiry teach us to be decent human beings? Kind of similar point actually to what Ralph was saying there. Another texter says, listen to Mike Graham's interview with John Rentoul this morning. Even John Rentoul admitted Liz Truss did not crash the economy. Well, not for the first time. John Rentoul is wrong, I'm afraid. Much as I like him, he's wrong on many things. Kevin in Sheffield says, if ever there was an example of there being a uni party, Nicky Morgan is it. She may as well be on the Labour backbenches. I was at one point expecting her to blame it all on Brexit, which the Lib Dems seemed to do during the debate in Parliament this morning. I cannot see why she was ever in the Conservative Party. That sort of convictionless MP is why we're in this mess, says Kevin in Sheffield. Disagree with that, to be honest. Tim says, what people really want to see is rapists in court, then deported or in jail. Why do so many women in Parliament, with so many women in Parliament, is there such a reluctance to have a public inquiry? It's shameless, says Tim. Jay says, hi Peter, are the British people a gang, as this government have been more successful in smashing us more than anybody else? Graham and Bushy says he might as well also say to put them on the naughty step, as this will have as much use as freezing their bank accounts, says Graham, talking about David Lammy there, the Foreign Secretary and Celebrity Mastermind contestant. Adam says, sorry Peter, but Lammy keeps calling them irregular migrants when they're illegal immigrants. Maybe it's just because he can't get facts right. If you haven't seen it, I implore you, watch David Lammy on Celebrity Mastermind. You will not regret it. It's on YouTube. Chris says, to put sanctions on the gangs, they have to know who they are. Very good point. Cliff in Berkshire says, there's some irony in that. If we follow the USA to effect regime change in several places, and now the USA is talking about effecting regime change in the UK, you couldn't make it up, says Cliff. This is Elon Musk talking about removing Keir Starmer within a year. I wonder if the Labour Party might do that. Derek says, Labour, Reeves and Starmer do not have a clue what they're doing. One thing being in opposition, slandering and criticising all the time. It's coming home to roost now. They're in government. Get ready for tax rises and cost cuts on top of October's budget. Well, we will see what happens. I am worried about getting through the winter, not personally, but for a lot of people. There is a fludemic that is happening. And also an NHS hospital threatened to charge a pensioner £482 a night if they didn't leave the hospital Hospital cases of flu have spiked, emergency services reporting the busiest winter ever. We'll get the latest on that from Paul Hunter. He's a professor of medicine at the University of East Anglia. Stay tuned for that next here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, there is a flu epidemic in the United Kingdom. More than 5,400 beds alone have been taken up by flu patients every day last week, up 3.5 times at the same time last year. Hospital admissions are up a fifth in a week and nearly 5 times the level recorded in early December. What's going on? Why are so many people getting flu? Let's talk to Paul Hunter. He's Professor of Medicine at the University of East Anglia. Paul, this is clearly a big problem. Why is it happening? Why is it happening now?
Well, I think it is a big problem. It's certainly one of the worst years that we've had for some time, although not quite as bad as the year 2 years ago, where we actually had a higher number of admissions with flu. But it is certainly a bad year this year. And as we see every winter, when we get large numbers of influenza cases, it is causing significant problems for hospitals, partly because of the extra beds that people are taking up because they're sick, but also because a lot of staff are still getting flu and having to go on sick themselves.
Why are they getting it so badly this year? Is there a particular strain that's worse or more virulent, or that people can pick up more easily, or what's happening?
I think we tend to get bad flu years every so often, and the last bad flu year was 2 years ago. Last year there was very little flu, relatively speaking. So, of course, this year does look quite bad compared to last year, but it's sort of at about the level that we saw the year before. Last year, there isn't a new variant of flu. The main type of flu that's circulating has been around for a number of years, but I think it's still partly to do with the COVID time where flu became very rare for a couple of years. And I think that in part what we're seeing is that the population immunity because of that time is lower, and I think that's why we're seeing the number of cases that we are at the moment.
What about the uptake of flu jabs? Because there seem to be, from what I've read and seen, quite a few people who haven't had their flu jabs this year who are entitled to it but have decided not to get it, Paul.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I think the uptake of flu vaccinations this year has been particularly disappointing.
Why is that, do you think?
I don't know. I think I think there's a lot of disinformation about vaccines in the media and in social media particularly, and I think people are perhaps becoming a little bit fatigued by the number of vaccines that have been offered over the recent years. Hopefully, this is something that will recover in
so
future
people have
years,
sort of been offered quite a lot of vaccines, and they're sort of saying, actually, especially if you're, let's say, over 65, and you're saying, have another COVID booster every single year, have a flu jab every single year, have a shingles injection, etc.
Yeah.
There are perhaps too many.
I think there is. I think you're quite right. I think there is certainly a strong element of truth in what you've just said there. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to leave it there just because we have some breaking news now. In fact, sorry, hold on just a second. There we are, Paul. Everton have just announced they've sacked their manager, Sean Dyche. The Premier League club have announced. We're going to talk to Ben Fletcher from talkSPORT after the break with that. So that is the breaking news that Everton has sacked its manager, Sean Dyche, from the Premier League club. That has just been announced. We'll talk to Ben from talkSPORT in a minute or two. Paul, sorry to interrupt the interview. Let's go back. Okay. Let's go back to you. I thought people would want to know that breaking news. How is the NHS coping with this? Because we're hearing from Professor Sir Stephen Powis, who's the NHS National Medical Director. He says hospitals are under exceptional pressure at the start of this new year. Mammoth demand stemming from this ongoing cold weather snap and respiratory viruses like flu. Is it worse this year? I mean, obviously we have higher number of cases, but presumably that automatically means the pressure is just so much greater on NHS in particular with emergency departments.
Yes, yeah, and of course also when you have a cold snap like we've got at the moment, people fall over, break bones, need to take up. So that's an additional pressure. So yeah, it is a big problem but on the plus side, it does look in the most recent data that's just come out in the last few hours that maybe this surge in influenza has already peaked, and that hopefully we'll start seeing fewer cases over the coming days and weeks. And if that is the case, then hopefully the pressure will ease off.
Can I ask you a random question, which has always sort of slightly bothered me? Professor Sir Stephen Powis is calling it A&E, but I've heard many doctors call it ED, like the emergency department. I just wonder why the discrepancy? Why doesn't everybody just call it the same thing?
A&E is British, ED is American.
But I think they call it ED in Northern Ireland, actually. I think I've heard that.
I do, yeah. I mean, I think certainly what we noticed with our own medical students over the years actually is that when American hospital dramas were popular, a lot of the jargon that they used to describe things,
the emergency room,
were coming out of our medical students because they were watching American hospital dramas. I mean, I'm of a generation, I call it any accident and emergency. Emergency department is perfectly acceptable.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That's Paul Hunter there, who's Professor of Medicine at the University of East Anglia. That is about the hospital cases spike. And also, Kieran in Tring has been in touch and says, is there a correlation between elderly people freezing at home because Reeves and Starmer's disgusting, heartless and spiteful financial attack on our pensioners? I mean, it can't be a coincidence. Kieran, I did an interview with a man called who was an advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan. He said not a single pensioner will die this winter because of this. I think he's wrong, and I think we're going to see that I'm going to be right. I don't want to be right, but I think I'm going to be right in that. And Kieran, I don't think the two are a coincidence at all. I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. Cliff says it's interesting that the NHS is so busy and that they're overstretched and short of staff, and yet when Keir Starmer decides to make a policy announcement from a hospital, they're the standard 24 staff all in uniform standing beside him, says Cliff. Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Cliff, and thanks to everybody else who's been in touch. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls after the break. You can give me a ring, you can send me a WhatsApp voice note or a WhatsApp text message, 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. And we're going to talk to Ben Fletcher from talkSPORT in just a minute, because Everton has sacked its manager, Sean Dyche, and that has been announced by the Premier League club. We'll bring the latest on that in just a second here on Talk.
What's your reaction to that, and indeed the political coverage of
the
this?
reality is that the Labour government's blunder budget has collapsed confidence. Sterling is falling, investment is falling, jobs are falling. The only thing that's going up, as I've just said in the House of Commons before I came here, is inflation's going up and the cost of debt is soaring. And that means that the cost of mortgages very quickly will be soaring. And if we're not very careful, if the government doesn't change course and cut this vast amount of wasteful spending that we all know is going on,
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, the breaking news here on Talk is that Sean Dyche has been sacked as the manager of Everton. Ben Fletcher from TalkSport is with me now. Ben, thank you for joining me this afternoon, and indeed on short notice. Sean Dyche, the second manager this week to be sacked in the Premier League. Why has Everton made this decision?
Well, it's been a hell of a week, hasn't it? I mean, first of all, we saw Julian Lopetegui leave as West Ham manager. He took training. I think everybody knew that Graham Potter was on his way in and Lopetegui was for the door. We thought the Premier League and football itself couldn't get much more crazy than that. And now this, yeah, Sean Dyche has left Everton. Rumours over his future for ages. Everton under new ownership, the Friedkin Group. So his future was under a little bit of scrutiny for the last couple of weeks. Everton 16th in the Premier League table. They lost 1-0 at Brighton at the weekend. So there was always a question mark hanging over Sean Dyche. So not really a shock that he's left Goodison in terms of it being a move by the board. I think the big shock is it's just hours ahead of kick-off of an FA Cup tie. And we're led to believe that the players found out that this had happened when they got off the team bus, arrived at Goodison, expecting to be greeted by Sean Dyche, and so they were greeted by the news that he has lost his job. So a shock on that front. And again, just from an organisational point of view, you wonder, you know, how's it come to this? By all means, sack a manager. The Friedkin Group, any club owner, is well within their gift to do that. But hours ahead of an FA Cup tie, it's very, very strange timing.
Who takes charge against Peterborough in the Cup tonight?
I can tell you exactly who takes charge. It is two members of the backroom staff. It is the under-18s head coach, Leighton Baines, former player, and club captain, Seamus Coleman. They'll be taking charge of things on an interim basis, and certainly tonight, while a permanent replacement is appointed. But they've not taken training with those players as leaders. They will have been involved. Coleman obviously will have played on the pitch, but it just feels a bit strange. Hours ahead of an FA Cup game that on paper you'd expect them to win. You know, Peterborough, a division below Everton in the Championship, but still very, very odd. And you'd think if you're a Peterborough fan right now, it adds a little bit of spice and maybe a little bit of motivation to really pile the misery on the Toffees.
Has Everton panicked here?
I think they probably have done. They probably looked at Ipswich, who looked doomed by all accounts before Christmas, and they had some really good recent results against the likes of Chelsea. They've now closed the gap between them and safety. They're probably looking at what's happening at the clubs around them. Wolves as well recently changed their manager. West Ham, Graham Potter's come in there after Julian Lopetegui was sacked earlier this week. And there probably is a little bit of panic. If not panic, then certainly they've been rushed to make a decision. If you change managers, the stats don't always show that you will stay up in the Premier League. It's not a given that if you sack a manager and replace it, whilst there is a so-called new manager bounce, it might not be enough to keep you in the Premier League. But I think certainly on this occasion, Everton, question marks over the manager's future anyway. They probably thought, if not now, then never. I just can't get my head around the fact that in a couple of hours' time you'll hear Everton Peterborough on TalkSport and Sean Dyche won't be in the dugout. You wonder what he's going to do with his evening now.
Well, indeed, perhaps listen to it on TalkSport.
Maybe, yeah.
Just speaking of Sean Dyche and his future, I mean, he's now a rich man. He was anyway, but certainly get a massive payoff. Who are the runners and riders to be his successor?
Well, curiously, a manager that you will have heard of called Jose Mourinho has had a bit of traction in recent days. Yeah, formerly of Chelsea, Tottenham, Manchester United, currently over in Turkey at Fenerbahce. He has worked with the Friedkin Group before at Roma, so no stranger to the club's owners. He's always been very, I wouldn't even say coy, he's been... what's the word I'm looking for? He's flirted with the possibility of returning to the Premier League. Would a club like Everton appeal to him? I think he'd probably relish the challenge, new ownership. He knows the league very well. He'd be back somewhere that he loves managing. He famously lived in a hotel when he was at Manchester United. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. In terms of other managers, former Everton manager Sam Allardyce, just turned 70, might not want to return, but he is renowned.
There will be a Bring Back Sam movement, no doubt. The memes will be out there already.
Indeed, he's kept clubs in the Premier League. I think all but one clubs under his stewardship he's managed to keep up. David Moyes, out of work at the moment as well, another former Everton manager. So there are options, but I would say the most likely, or the most, not even outlandish, I think the Hollywood appointment would be Jose Mourinho. And if you're thinking that will never happen, just think to yourself, he's worked with the Friedkin Group before and he's desperate to return to these shores.
Ben, thank you. That's Ben Fletcher there from talkSPORT. Really appreciate you coming in to give us the latest on the fact that Sean Dyche has been sacked as the manager of Everton, the Premier League club, now searching for a new manager, and Ben giving us the runners and riders there. So we'll bring you the latest, and if there's any developments on that story, we will of course bring them to you between now and 7. And of course we know that Everton are playing Peterborough in the Cup tonight. Full coverage on talkSPORT. Mark in Lincolnshire has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Mark, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say? I think it's the grooming gang scandal, or the rape or paedophile gangs, however you want to describe them, that you've given me a ring about. You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi there, Peter. Hi, mate. Yeah, basically, it's... I mean, obviously, quite appalled, disgusted, whatever adjective you want to use for it, with the decision yesterday with the Labour Party with this. Because this does need a national inquiry, obviously, because it's... You know, we don't really have any idea on exactly how many towns are involved, how many victims are involved, how many perpetrators are involved. We don't know any of this information, really. We just have to kind of glean from, not necessarily from hearsay, but from, you know, facts that we do have. You know, Rotherham, it's 1,400 victims that we know of, you know, Oldham, all these kind of places. But there's other places as well. Yeah. Nobody's really looked into this. Nobody's really looked into the cities. What's going on there? I
mean, their argument, isn't it, that the Alexis J report has done some of that. I mean, I don't think it has, to be honest. But I wonder what you make. Maybe we could actually hear from Andy Burnham again. Then I'll ask your opinion about it in just a second, Mark. This is Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, in terms of what he has said. He's broken ranks, essentially, with the Labour High Command. He was talking to BBC Radio Manchester a little bit earlier on. I just want to play this again for people who might have missed it a little bit earlier. And then, Mark, I'll bring you back in to give your opinion on it. Let's see what and hear what Andy Burnham said.
In my view, the government was right to reject that form of opportunism. But I did hear last night, coming out of that debate, ministers saying they are open to discussing issues now with survivors. And I will have my voice into this and say, I do think there is the case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned and the one we've seen in Rotherham, the one we've seen in Telford, to draw out some of these national issues and compel people to give evidence who then may have charges to answer and be held to account. That is something I couldn't do at my level.
What do you make of what Andy Burnham said there, Mark?
There's a lot of good points in what he's saying. I don't know whether you necessarily want a limited inquiry. I think it has to have a relatively broad scope. It has to have essentially pretty much limitless power in who it can point the finger at and hold to account. I kind of worry about that because there's so many elements to this. I mean, for me, you know, what happened yesterday in Parliament with this was them basically repeating the exact reason that this was hidden for 30, 40 years, however long this has been going on.
The thing I want to know, Mark, the thing I want an answer to is why on many occasions does it seem that these rapists, these child rapists, seem to have more rights than their victims, than children, and why it is that on so many occasions the authorities have been involved. I mean, the prosecution's aspect is a big, big aspect of this, and it has to be done, and it has to be done correctly. Another aspect, which is at least as important, is those who turn a blind eye. And sometimes that's very difficult to prove, actually, in terms of sometimes it's easy to prove, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's people saying it's very explicit things, like police officers, as we know, as Jeremy heard yesterday, and various other people have called the station to say, you know, they're reported these crimes and we're told, just stop what you're doing, you'll be called a racist. I mean, that's very clearly wrong. And then there are other things that are not less wrong, they're still totally wrong, but there are people who turned a blind eye, said, oh, don't upset the apple cart, don't report that, this is a cultural issue, we can't talk about this because it's racist. And there's a big report actually on the front page of the Times today as well about a definition of Islamophobia, which I think is absolutely disgraceful, that to say, oh, it's a religious trope, it's a cliche, that Pakistani men are taking part in these grooming gangs. Well, not all Pakistani men are, obviously, but some are, and it is a problem with Pakistani grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them. And we've just got to be able to call things what they are. We've got to be able to have free speech and to plainly say what things are, Mark. And it really worries me that there's so much of our society where that just isn't the case anymore.
Well, the problem with this, Peter, and one of the reasons, you know, the whole, oh, you can't say I might be accused of racism or whatever, yeah, that kind of thing, that all really is pointing to the fact that it's inescapable that there is a very definite element of race and religion to do with this. Yeah. We all know this because they're from one part of society, and they've targeted pretty much specifically a different part of society. And the question that needs to be raised in any inquiry is why? Why were they targeting specifically these girls? Because quite frankly, the way I see this, and this all points directly to, and the imams and the community leaders can hide their heads as much as they like, but they need to address this issue.
Yes, they do.
Because this is the problem. You know,
and you need leadership.
I read on Twitter yesterday. Yeah. Somebody made a post on Twitter yesterday, and it summed it up perfectly. If a white kid scuffs the Quran in a school, he's made to prostrate himself with the local chief constable and his mother, essentially begging for his life in front of the local community leaders, on, you know, recorded on TV and all the rest of it. Yet the rape of thousands of girls, of white girls in this country, and the silence is literally deafening. You know, this is the kind of thing that creates any kind of, you know, if they want to talk about cultural tensions or cultural issues or racism, this is what creates it.
Yes,
the very fact that they're not even coming out and addressing this just makes people think, well, you're condoning it then, aren't you? You're saying that it's absolutely fine. Why are you saying it's absolutely fine? Is it because of Islam, is this? Is that why you're saying it's fine? Because we're lesser people than you. And Mark, is that the reason?
Mark, we've got to go to the news, but all those points make absolutely perfect sense, and I agree with every single one of them. Fiona in Leeds says it sounded like Andy Burnham is scared for the future of Labour, and that, I think, is a very, very interesting point politically. This is interesting. It's not nearly as important as the issues themselves in terms of the fact that this is ongoing. It is happening right now, and all that has been done, all the condemnation, all that every single politician has done, some of them have helped the situation, some of them have hindered the situation, but it is still going on. And we're going to continue talking about it on this programme. We're one of the few media outlets that have been talking about this consistently in the last 10 days. Want your thoughts as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening. This is Thursday Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. Want to get your voice on the air in the next couple of hours. There's lots to talk about. 0344 499 1000. In a second, Sir John Redwood, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, is going to tell us about the market turmoil, the fact that Rachel Reeves' budget doesn't seem to have landed very well. It's 10 weeks on now, and the price of borrowing has gone up, up, up. We'll talk about food prices as well, not going anywhere but up as well. And Liz Truss threatening legal action against Sir Keir Starmer for saying that she crashed the economy. Didn't she? Well, maybe Sir John Redwood has a different perspective on that. We'll talk about Andy Burnham as well, splitting with Starmer and calling for an inquiry into the paedophile gangs. We'll talk to Harry Cole this hour as well, the political editor of The Sun, about his show Never Mind the Ballots, and whether the UK should take back ISIS members in Syria. That's according to Trump's terror chief, Sebastian Gorka, who's been on this station before. Should Shamiha Begum come back to the UK, the ISIS jihadi bride? Would you be happy about that? Maybe you think she should be put on trial here. Tell us your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can also send me a voice note, a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, things are seriously difficult in the economy, and the Conservatives asked an urgent question in Parliament today of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She didn't turn up. She sent out her deputy, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. He was asked about what on earth is going on, and Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, had this message for Rachel Reeves.
Where is the Chancellor? It is a bitter regret that at this difficult time of these serious issues, she herself is nowhere to be seen. Mr. Speaker, in the last 48 hours, borrowing costs have reached a 27-year high, and it is the Chancellor's decisions that have led us here.
That's Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor. However, the Chancellor wasn't there herself. Darren Jones, as I said, he was there. He defended Labour's record.
He talked about the debt burden this country has. Maybe we should just reflect a little as to why we have so much debt. It's because pre-pandemic, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the burden of debt inherited by this government from the party opposite from 2010 onwards, why did the last government have to borrow so much money every single month? Every single month, not just to invest, but to pay the day-to-day bills because of an absolute failure to get growth into the economy. They could not make the numbers add up. They've stacked up the country's credit card. They've left it to this party to deal with, and we are going to deal with it. That is why these fiscal rules are non-negotiable. That is why public spending will be within the number set out at the budget. We're starting the spending review now. It will conclude in June. Public services will have to live within their means. The Chancellor has been very, very clear about that. And that's why, with this government, you get economic stability, absolute clarity on public spending, and that is why the British people trust this party and booted that lot out of office.
Darren Jones there, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Well, let's talk to someone else who understands the numbers. That's Sir John Redwood, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Sir John, thank you for joining me today. Just in layman's terms, just lay this out for us, for people who are not economists, who are not experts like you. What's going on? Why does it affect us? Why is the price of debt so expensive now? That leads to other things like the price of groceries going up. Tell us, just explain this to us if you don't mind, Sir John.
Yes, the price of debt going up is bad news for mortgage holders, because when they need to renew their mortgage, it's at a higher rate, or if they want to take out a new one, it's more difficult, more expensive. There's knock-on to prices in the shops from the budget tax increases we've seen. And above all, the government has less money to spend on nurses, doctors and teachers, and we need more of those, because it's got so much more to spend on just paying the interest bill on all the money it is borrowing. And every time some of the borrowings run out, they have to reissue new debt, roll them over, and it's going to be at a much higher interest rate, so they're going to have much less money to spend on other good things. But what we're seeing is the markets have been very upset by the impact of the budget. All those tax rises, instead of narrowing the deficit in the way they planned, are in danger of doing the opposite because growth has collapsed. We were growing quite quickly at the beginning of the year. We're not growing at all anymore. And if you stop growing, you don't get increased tax revenue coming in, and you get increased costs. The state has to pay more benefits to people who don't get a job or who lose their job. Industries need more subsidy because they're not making so much profit. So unfortunately, the accounts are going wrong because the growth has stopped. And I think a big reason for the growth stopping is the huge impact on business and consumers of those very big tax rises.
Was it far too big a risk to rely on business in this budget to say, well, there's a tax shortfall, you'll make it up?
Yes, of course it was, because business, in many cases, were not making big profits. And if they suddenly have to pay, say, 10% more for the people they're already employing, how are they going to pay that? It's more than their profit. So they've either got to put their prices up or they have to cut their costs. And that means sacking people and doing less. And so we've got into that doom loop. The higher taxes to reduce the deficit are not reducing it the way imagined, because suddenly businesses are saying, you know what, I've got to put the prices up, do a bit less, and I'm stopping hiring people. And it's the very opposite of what we need. We need more business, more growth. Because you see, every extra pound that a business generates or an individual gets paid in wages is going to be the most highly taxed pound that they've got. And so it's very tax rich. So if you stop people and stop companies earning extra money, they're not going to be paying all that additional profits tax, or they're not going to be paying those higher rates of income tax, which people have to do when their earnings go up.
Who's to blame for this situation that we're in? Is it Rachel Reeves? Is it global factors? I mean, Darren Jones would have us believe that the economy and the debt markets are all working efficiently and as they're meant to work. Is this Rachel Reeves' fault? Is this global factors? Who's to blame here?
Yeah, a very big bit of the blame must rest with the government, because as I've been describing, it was the run-up to the budget with all the talk about tax rises that started to kill confidence, and it was then the very big tax rises, particularly on business, which killed confidence, affected attitudes towards hiring people and paying people more, that has done so much specific UK damage. Now, it is quite true that the longer-term interest rates for government have gone up a bit in the States as well, not as much as in the UK, but they have gone up a bit, and that would have had some impact. But the majority impact, the reason the pound is tumbling as well as the interest rates going up here, is the budget. Because in America, the interest rates have gone up a bit, but the dollar has gone up because people think it's a strong economy and it's growing rather well.
Liz Truss is the former Prime Minister. I know you have supported quite a few of her thoughts and measures, and ideologically you're pretty similar, not identical, of course. But in a post on her social media accounts, she had this message for Labour on the economy and on her personal record as Prime Minister. Let's have a look at what Liz Truss said earlier today.
Rachel Reeves has pushed this country to the brink of economic crisis through high taxes, high regulation, and disastrous net zero policies. When I tried to fix these problems back in 2022, I was undermined by the economic establishment, and I was forced to reverse the policies before they were even implemented.
So, John, we know as well that Liz Truss has threatened to, well, in fact, she has sent what's called a cease and desist letter, essentially saying, stop saying it or I'll sue you, to Keir Starmer, who said she crashed the economy. Has that got any credibility?
Well, that's a legal process which will have its own force. I mean, let me point out that... I should have said, has her contention that, has Keir Starmer's contention that she crashed the economy got... I mean, lots of people will scoff at that and say it's pretty straightforward. I want to answer your point, but I need to say to your viewers that I offered Liz Truss and Kwasi advice on the budget, which they did not accept. I wanted them to spend and borrow less, and I think that would have helped. But the Bank of England has now studied what went on over the time of that budget, and they have very fairly concluded that the majority of the interest rate changes were the result of Bank of England policy and what was happening in the pension fund market, and were not the direct result of the budget. The budget didn't help, but it wasn't the main cause. And so I think that gives strength to the legal action you're talking about, that At the time, you may remember, the Bank of England was actually putting up its base rates around the time of the budget. At the time of the budget, it announced an eye-poppingly large sale of bonds, £80 billion of bonds to be dumped on the market, which was obviously going to drive the market down. And then the killer was the following Monday, when it emerged that the pension funds had all bought gilts they couldn't afford to fully pay for, and they bought them on a type of credit. And as the bond market fell, they had to pay up rather more money against their positions, which they couldn't afford. So they turned sellers as well. So you had the perfect crisis in the bond market created by Bank of England selling and by pension funds selling, which was nothing to do with Liz Truss. And it was resolved very quickly, because you may remember the Bank of England then switched policy and said, right, we're going to buy a load of bonds. And so the famous 10-year interest rate, which we're all looking at the moment, briefly spiked at 4.38% under Truss. It's currently 4.8%. And it went back down very quickly to 3.1% as soon as the Bank of England started buying the bonds. So the current position is worse than the Liz Truss position, because the rates have been driven higher, and it's very clearly much more to do with the government, because the Bank of England has actually been cutting base rates and hasn't announced a big increase in its bond sales.
But sure, I'm sure you're right with all of that, but surely the 45p tax U-turn, the fact that that Kwasi Kwarteng said, and there's more to come, the fact that there wasn't enough warming up of the economic establishment, which may well have been put paid to Liz Truss to some degree, but essentially shocking the market into what they did, that can't have helped in any way either.
Well, as I told you, it didn't help, but don't believe me, read the Bank of England report. They admit that a lot of what went wrong were all those things to do with how the Bank of England was changing interest rates, managing bonds, and then the pension funds getting into trouble. I do think that it was unhelpful to have a bigger deficit, and it's exactly that bigger deficit which is haunting the current government. And the extra spending in the case of Liz Truss was a whole load of subsidies to energy, and I, for example, didn't think that better off people like MPs with 2 homes should get 2 lots of energy subsidy. But that happened, and unfortunately the markets took it awry, and it's been common now to always blame the Liz Truss government. But I do think people interested in the subject seriously need to look at those interest rate rises, those bond sales, and the pension fund problems, which were a very important part of that mini crisis. They should also remember that the rates came down again, and they stayed lower than they are today. So the government has to answer, why is it that your rates are considerably worse than the Truss rates, when all you want to do is trash Liz Truss and blame her, when her actions two or more years ago are nothing to do with the very high rates today?
Let me ask you, just before you go, about what Andy Burnham has said. This is the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He set up his views on an inquiry into the scandal around paedophile gangs. He spoke to BBC Radio Manchester a bit earlier today.
In my view, the government was right to reject that form of opportunism. But I did hear last night, coming out of that debate, ministers saying they are open to discussing issues now with survivors. And I will add my voice into this and say, I do think there is the case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned and the one we've seen in Rotherham, the one we've seen in Telford, to draw out some of these national issues and compel people to give evidence who then may have charges to answer and be held to account. That is something I couldn't do at my level.
What do you make of what Andy Burnham has said there, Sir John?
Well, I'd like to praise him for that, because I think it's a very sensible statement. I think it's a great pity this week that the government didn't take the opportunity both to see their bill through and to grant an inquiry, because then the opposition would obviously have backed off from its motion. And that would have been a much better outcome. I was pleased to see the Prime Minister moving in the direction of inquiry. I think Andy Burnham has given some reasons why you might want one. I think the public is desperate for one, because they feel this has been covered up by successive governments, starting with Labour and going through the coalition and Conservative years. And they want to know who covered up what. And they don't just want the rapists prosecuted, they still haven't been, but they also want some of the senior officials who may have actively covered things up to also be disciplined.
John, thank you. That's Sir John Redwood there, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Michelle says the Bank of England did it on purpose because Liz Truss wanted to cut taxes full stop. They wanted Rishi in by hook or by crook. Mark in Warfield says, great show. If the US is so concerned about the ex-British ISIS terrorists, why don't they take her in? Steve says, what is stopping Shamiha Begum crossing the channel illegally on a boat? If we can prevent her return, why can't we stop the others, says Steve. Also, Michelle says, Shamiha Begum is not a British citizenship. That was stripped away, so no, she should not come back. Gian says, I never thought Liz Truss crashed the economy. And also says, does that mean Andy Burnham has jumped on the far-right bandwagon? Well, you may ask. The US President says Derek is normally first met by the Prime Minister of the UK face-to-face. Starmer is a socialist left-winger with zero personality. Trump will eat him alive and give the thumbs up to Musk to bring it all down. Well, we will be talking about that with Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, in just a few minutes' time. We are going to talk about Shamiha Begum next with Simon Diggins, my favourite military analyst. He will be with us in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Same time, you got Rachel Reeves's budget almost like a boiled frog. It wasn't the immediate sort of market scepticism about it, but it's taken a couple of months, but it's really ticking up. Borrowing costs are going up. She's due in China this week, so Chris Philp on the show today has come out and said she shouldn't be leaving the country. Last time a chancellor left the country when borrowing rates were this high, it was Kwasi Kwarteng, and he flew home and he was in the car from Heathrow Airport back to Westminster when he read on Twitter that he'd been fired.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, Sebastian Gorka is no stranger to this channel. He was in the first Trump administration. He's going to be in the next one as well. He's deputy assistant to the president-elect. He advises on all sorts of matters in regard to terror. He is saying that what we should do in the United Kingdom is take back ISIS Britons, people like Shamiha Begum, the jihadi bride. He's saying that Keir Starmer needs to show some moral responsibility. Here, he's saying, he's not suggesting that the Biden administration has said this previously. They didn't say it would damage relations, but actually Sebastian Gorka is saying that it might. It's concerning Downing Street. It's a really interesting story. The US, of course, leads a coalition of countries into the battle against ISIS, led against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. and of course things are changing there dramatically. Well, let's get some analysis from Colonel Simon Diggins. He's a military and defence analyst, obviously senior figure in the UK Army previously. Simon, has Sebastian Gorka got a point here?
I think he has, Peter. The issue really is us taking responsibility for basically our mess. We've got a number of people over there who suborned, subverted, whatever, and follow the ISIS ideology. They are British people, and we need to take responsibility for them, which means we need to bring them back.
Why should we take responsibility? Some people may say, why is that our problem if people are radicalised by, in what some people call the digital caliphate, if people are radicalised online, or even in this country, go abroad, or become an ISIS bride in the case of Shamiha Begum? I mean, why should we take her back, essentially? Why is that something that we're responsible for?
Because we've allowed it to happen, basically. We've not, with a particular community, they've come from they've come from sort of heritage Muslim communities in this country. They've not been properly integrated into society. We've ignored the issue of Islamist threats far too long, and have turned a blind eye to radicalisation in this country. So they are our responsibility. It's us that's allowed this mess to happen, and we as a country need to take responsibility for them. Shamiha Begum is also slightly different. That she was very young. She was actually taken across when she was a 15-year-old. And that really, in many other respects, if it was a question of kind of, she'd been trafficked for sex, working, or whatever it be, then there'd be no question about it. In this case, she was trafficked to be effectively an ISIS bride. And I think some understanding of her needs to be around the fact that she was very, very young when that happened.
Should we be understanding towards Shamiha Begum?
Yeah, no, we should, in the same way we would be for any child. I've dealt in Sierra Leone with child soldiers, and you've got to understand what happened to them and what you need to do to try and bring back into society. Does not mean she's not to be held responsible for what she's done. The age of criminal responsibility in consent in this country for children is normally around the age of 12, so she could still be held responsible for what she's done, but nonetheless the fact that she was a child when she was taken abroad actually would be taken into account. For the others who are adults, bring them back and again put them under the law and convict them if they're guilty of their crimes which they have committed. ISIS was a terrorist organisation, is a terrorist organisation, and membership of it is therefore a terrorist offence, and we should deal with them. I mean, the pressure from us is not just about the special relationship. America, particularly under Trump, wants to get out of what they call the forever wars. Most of these individuals are held in the northeast of Syria, in areas occupied by Kurdish rebels at the moment. But the area itself is one which America's been forced to commit troops to over a long period of time, and they want to get out of that particular game. So this is, in terms of what America wants out of this, is not just about Britain taking responsibility, if you like, for its own mess, but also saying that we, as an American people, and Trump very particular, do not wish to be involved in these forever wars in these places. And I think that's something, in terms of our relationship with America, the big picture relationship, we should take into account as well.
Because, as I said a minute ago, this has been suggested before by the Biden administration. How seriously, I should say, should Starmer be taking this? He's meeting Macron today at Chequers. Presumably they'll talk about it. I just wonder what the sanction or problems could be, economically, military, whatever, if they don't listen to Sebastian Gorka and, by extension, Trump on this.
I think we'd be very foolish not to. As you said, this is not actually, it's not a specific, I mean, it's put across from the Trump administration elected, if I can put it in those terms, in very stark terms, using all the kind of rhetoric which you get from the Trump camp. But it's not a new demand. The Biden administration have been saying that in the same way as the Biden administration was also talking to us about defence expenditure and where they want to be. We just really, as a country, and indeed as Europe as well, have not been listening to the Americans. The Americans, I think, are bored and tired of being what they regard as sort of the security umbrella, when the rest of us are not paying our way. And I think that's where they are with this. So I think Starmer particularly and Lammy would be very, very foolish to ignore this. It may be inconvenient to us, and I heard David Lammy today saying that under no circumstances will these individuals be returned. I think it's a very foolish and very bold statement on his behalf, because I think this is something which we're not listening to the Americans. Trump may put it across in a particularly aggressive, slightly rhetorical way. Lots of, the language is often more violent, but he's not saying anything that other American administrations have not already said. And we'd be foolish not to listen to them.
And interesting in the language from Sebastian Gorka, who's perhaps more temperate in his rhetoric than Trump, but nonetheless there's a not particularly veiled threat in terms of him saying, talking about this, saying any nation which wishes to be seen to be a serious ally and friend of the most powerful nation in the world should act in a fashion that reflects that serious commitment. That is doubly so for the United Kingdom, which is a very special place in President Trump's heart, and we would all wish to see the special relationship fully re-established. He's not beating about the bush there, is he, Simon?
He really isn't, and and that hence, whether it be defence expenditure, whether it be this issue, we need to listen to the Americans, and it's often very transactional. It's often seen as very transactional with President Trump. But the thing is, we don't really know when we might need the American support.
Yep.
If we're not actually working with them and supporting them, then actually, when it comes down to it, that's where it's going to kind of count. And if we've shown ourselves dilatory or not willing to support for something which they legitimately and reasonably want, then I think we put ourselves on the back foot, and that's not a good place to be.
Simon, thank you. That's Simon Diggins there, Colonel Simon Diggins, military defence analyst. Do you agree with him? Do you think we should take Shamiha Begum back because Trump says we should? Give me your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. Should we be understanding towards her because she was a jihadi bride and she was 15 when she went out there? I would personally say no, but give me your thoughts on it. Thanks to Deborah, who says we visit Spain 3 times every year, January, May and September. We're currently here and can tell you that we're seeing no size in costs anywhere from our visits, in no increase, I think, in 2024. In fact, everywhere you look, you can see tower cranes that way. They're building at a massive rate. We can only do that now with a strong economy. It's interesting to see how differently they do things from the UK with infrastructure, including installation of new road networks, finished before brick is laid. A great place to live. The old age pension is around £2,500 a month. Council tax about £100 per year. We can also eat out for a meal for two with a bottle of wine for around £20. Sadly, we're back to rip off Britain soon, says Deborah. Sounds as if I need a nice Spanish holiday. And we will talk to Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, in just a second about his show Never Mind the Ballots. Quite a few interesting lines coming out of that. We'll show you a few clips and you can watch the whole thing on YouTube as well. Harry will be here in the studio with me in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, if you go to Talk's YouTube page right now, you can get The Sun's Never Mind the Ballots. Its presenter is, of course, Harry Cole, the political editor. Hello there.
Good evening.
It's been a busy political year so far, and it's only the 9th day of the year. You've been interviewing the Shadow Home Secretary, and big row about the economy as well. Tell us your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been back and sort of writing about Elon Musk constantly. I mean, he's been tweeting every 5 minutes, as far as I can see.
Over 200 tweets
about Keir Starmer. But underneath the surface of all that, look at the markets, look at the long-term borrowing costs, look at the pound. It's all looking a little bit like October 2022. And Liz Truss was gracing us with her presence.
But she didn't crash it, because if you say that, she's going to sue you.
She's going to see almost a sort of Barbra Streisand effect, isn't it? I think, which is an online phenomenon of basically trying to cancel something makes it people talk about it more.
She's a funny girl.
It's it's almost back to the 70s at the moment. I think we're heading in the paper tomorrow is rising debt costs, sinking pound, miserable economic figures. Things are not looking good. There's been a boiled frog approach, I think, to the Rachel Reeves budget. It wasn't an immediate market.
In 10 weeks and still we're talking about it.
Absolutely. And bond traders are looking a bit nervously at Britain. Yes, there's a sort of across Europe, there's a bit of, sort of pre-Trump jitters, I think, in the markets about the prospect of tariffs coming down. But people are selling British debt quicker than they are anyone else, and they're not interested in us. And so Rachel Reeves due in China this weekend, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the Tories are sniffing blood a little bit here.
Yeah, and Harry was talking to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. This is what Chris had to say.
Why is Rachel Reeves not having the Truss treatment?
Well, that's a really good question. As you say, bond yields are higher, meaning bond prices are lower than they were at the point that Kwasi Kwarteng got sacked.
So you're saying fire the Chancellor?
Years ago. I'm just observing.
Should the Chancellor be fired?
I'm just observing. Well, I think she's doing a terrible job. I think the whole government should be fired, frankly, including Rachel Reeves, because they've jacked up taxes, they've crushed pensioners, they're crushing farmers, they're crushing businesses with their high taxes.
There, the Shadow Home Secretary speaking to Harry's show, Never Mind the Ballots. Not mincing his words there.
No, Chris Philp, I mean, don't forget this is a man who was Chief Secretary of the Treasury under Liz Truss. So he knows a thing or two about, when the markets pull the plug on confidence in a government. Not mincing his words. And actually, where is the Chancellor? There was an urgent question today in the House of Commons. She sent her deputy Darren Jones out to field the awkward questions. And you have to say, Rachel Reeves is looking a bit stressed these days. She did not look a happy bunny at PMQs yesterday. Obviously, she's got this controversial trip coming to China heading up. And actually, I was reading today that it was Dennis Healey was on his way to the airport, on his way to catch Concorde when he did an about turn in 1976, a little bit before even you or my time, when he had to phone the IMF for cap in hand for a bailout. We're not there yet.
To say nothing of Kwasi Kwarteng, of course, learning he'd been sacked from Twitter.
The last place a Chancellor wants to be
is the IMF.
Well, the last place a Chancellor wants to be is in the air or out of the country when things are going down the Swanee, because you want the sort of stable hand on the tiller. I do wonder whether this trip will go ahead this weekend or not.
Although interestingly, there's a whole chapter in your book with James Heal out of the blue about Liz Truss and her changing attitude to China. I wonder, with that in mind, if I were the Chinese, I might be a bit confused as to what the British attitude is, because it seems to have done a 180 about 3 or 4 times in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, but Liz Truss obviously taking a very hard line towards them towards the end, wanted to sort of designate them as an official threat. Boris was a little bit more relaxed. Rishi Sunak obviously had a sort of quite Treasury viewpoint on it, which is, we can't pull the plug on all this investment and all these imports and exports and the like. Starmer's trying to kind of ride 2 horses really on this, saying, look, we need to be clear-eyed about the threat, and David Lammy will talk about progressive realism or whatever nonsense he has as his mantra. I've listened to it, tried to get my head around that a few times. But look, it's clear that...
As long as you've watched someone's Celebrity Mastermind.
I have indeed, Marion Antoinette. They're obviously trying to reset relations all around the world, but at the same time, you have an incoming president in Donald Trump who is extremely clear-eyed about China, and under Boris caused all sorts of chaos for the government around stripping Chinese infrastructure out of our telecoms and things like that. So I do think those things are going to clash up. Obviously, Starmer sat down with the Chinese at the G20 not long ago. David Lammy's been out to Beijing. Reeves is due there now. Whisper it, Starmer's due there in the this year. Whether that happens remains to be seen. But pulling the plug on a visit to Beijing is no small thing. These people have extremely long memories. So it's a really tricky situation the Chancellor finds herself in this back end of this week.
And you spoke on Never Mind the Ballots to Mike Tapp, the Labour MP for Dover.
Rising star, I'd say. He was a very impressive young man. I say that, he's probably older than me, but he was a really good guy. He's actually a very, very articulate man, and I think the Labour Party should wheel out a bit more because I'd say he speaks human.
They should tap for a few more media appearances. Well, let's see what he said to Harry during the programme.
Do you agree with that? Should she be staying here and sorting the markets out?
Look, we will, of course, be negotiating and speaking with international partners and international governments to ensure that we're getting the best deals for the people here.
Yeah, but last time a Chancellor left the country, when borrowing was at this level, was Kwasi Kwarteng in October 2022, and he flew home and got fired. Should the Chancellor be leaving the country this week when there's turmoil in the market?
I'm convinced that the Chancellor will travel if it's going to benefit the people in this country. That's what this is about. It's about delivering for the people.
That's Mike Tapp there, the Labour MP for Dover and Deal. And just back to Chris Philp as well, the big dominant political argument, and certainly what our viewers and listeners want to talk about and have done for the last 10 days. The Sun's been covering this in depth. We've been covering this in depth. A lot of the media abandoned the story, especially towards the end of last week. I just wonder, in regard to an inquiry, what do you feel in your bones? Do you think a national inquiry is going to happen?
Well, we've had Andy Burnham come out today now and say that there should be a national inquiry. He's normally a pretty good canary in the coal mine of where he's got a remarkable habit. And if you remember back to lockdown and COVID era, he was very, very good at getting his sort of punches in first when he could see which way the wind was blowing. There was a softening in the language last night from Keir Starmer's team at Number 10 saying he was open-minded about
Jess Phillips said that as well.
Yeah, and well, he'll be guided by victims, and obviously, we've had victims coming forward and saying they do want an inquiry. Well, we haven't had, and we talked about this on the show a little bit, and the word reckoning comes up a lot, is because of the way this story has developed over the last 20 years, 15 years really, 20 that dates back years and years before that. But there's been a sort of drip of stories about it. There's never been a sort of moment of sort of national recognition of quite how serious and grim and horrific this situation is, and what the underlying causes, and whether
do you think Chris Philp gets that? Because we've seen the Alexis J report, for example, 20 recommendations. We had Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday saying they accepted 18 of them, but they didn't implement them. They had 18 months, they didn't implement them. Now Labour says they're working at pace to implement them. Well, they haven't done anything in 6 months.
Some of these things are very knotty to implement, though. It's not just you can just say, look, you can say yes, we're going to implement them.
But you'd imagine if you were the Home Office, wouldn't you? If you knew Jess Phillips was coming in as a minister, that they'd be ready to press go on day one.
You would, but then a lot of these will all require primary legislation, and you'll remember that the painful process of that can take months and even years to get into position, enters consultations, and you've got to get this stuff right, essentially, because otherwise you end up being, spend the rest of the time in the courts. It's really tricky, but I think, we can talk about, the Alexis J report, which obviously was much broader into systematic child abuse across lots of different things, but it's this particular story, the grooming gangs, the northern towns, and it only really looked at 6 of them. And actually, now we know there's 50 different towns where this abuse may have happened in. I do think that Elon Musk has caught a sort of a moment, and it might take a critical neighbour, an ally, a friend, someone not in our sort of political ecosystem to go, just be the boy in the Emperor's New Clothes and point that finger and go, what on earth is this? And, even Alexis J said, it's not how she would like to have happened, but, it has given it a fresh impetus. It has put it front and centre. It's a little bit like, almost in a weird way, Mr. Bates in the post office. We knew this had happened. We knew all of these strands of the story. We knew all the outrage about it, but it wasn't until the sort of nation came together, and it was almost this time last year, wasn't it? In this sort of moment of clarity when actually Westminster gets the electric shock therapy that it occasionally needs to sort of kick in. So if that happens, it's a good thing. But what they'll argue over is, do we really need another sort of full years of investigation with lawyers coining their pocket, lining their pockets, or is there a way we could actually crystallise what we know about it, bringing the strands together in a shorter, sharper way? And I think that's what the Tories are pushing for.
Well, let's just see and hear what Chris Philp had to say.
Which police?
So you want basically, essentially, a show trial?
I want to know who covered this up. I want to know who failed these victims by being negligent, by disbelieving their accounts. I want to see a day of reckoning for those people who did not do their job properly.
That's not an inquiry, though. That's a show trial.
No, it's not a show trial. It's getting to the truth about what happened. It's finding out if there are other towns where this happened that we don't even know about sitting here today.
So, Harry, your show, Never Mind the Ballots, it's on Talk's YouTube page now, and you recorded it today?
Today, yeah. So
very good. Right up to date.
Every Thursday, we'll be back for... In fact, we're not doing it next Thursday, but we'll be back for Donald Trump's inauguration next Monday, so we should have some lively guests from both sides of the pond looking at what's going to be, you know, by anyone's account, it's going to be an astonishing moment.
It's not going to be dull, is it?
It never is with Donald Trump. I mean, I've been watching some of the footage this afternoon of Jimmy Carter's funeral.
Yes.
And you have these you have every living president.
5 of them.
5 of them now. You had George Bush sort of tapping Obama on the stomach. You have Kamala Harris and Mrs. Biden sitting next to each other, clearly hating each other.
Yes.
There's
pretending they love each other.
Democrat bad blood. You've got Obama, chatting to Donald Trump, and it's one thing. It's a little bit. It's like when we see the sort of PMs line up at the cenotaph. It's it is a very exclusive club, but only those 5 people can really know what it's like. And when you see all of them together, so even at a funeral, there was so much politics going on there, and so we'll see that almost on steroids on the steps of Congress.
And of course, Kamala Harris has a role as vice president, doesn't she, with the swearing in and the inauguration? Yeah.
But what I don't think we'll see is that the sort of horrific scenes in Washington in the run-up to the handover of power from Trump to Biden. I think the Democrats will go out of their way to make it as sort of happy, clappy and peaceful as possible.
Welcoming.
To make the point that this is how it should look like. But, I don't think we'll see the Donald Trump that we saw before when, remember his first ever press conferences, he sent out his spokesman, Sean Spicer, and to have an argument with the press about crowd sizes.
Yes.
I think all of that sort of insecurity around Donald Trump has gone now.
Oh, well, they'll be ready to hit the ground running, won't they?
Well, you'd hope.
They've told us so much about what they actually want to happen.
Yes, but I do think there'll be some short, sharp shocks in sort of presidential executive orders. I think people who are hoping that he might not do some of the things he said he was going to do in the campaign might be looking a little bit glum by the end of week after next 20th of January.
20th of January, yeah. Monday.
Week on Monday.
Yep. Harry, thank you very much, Harry.
Always a pleasure.
Harry Cole is, of course, the political editor of The Sun. He's also the presenter of Never Mind the Ballots. That is on Talk's YouTube page now, where you can watch it. We're going to take your calls, texts and tweets in just a minute, reacting to all that Harry has said and plenty of other politics and other issues around today, including Shamiha Begum. Stay with us here on Talk.
people saying it, but the reality is, as we know, when there have been wildfires many other places and in California, some of the issue has been a failure to clear very dry debris. There's sort of, environmental plans that, the policies where there hasn't been the mass clearing. We've also seen massive issues with the fire department in California, have we not? Where we've seen massive cuts to the police and the fire department. We've also seen huge amount of extra building. There's been concerns fire hydrants haven't been working, a shortage of water in some of the reservoirs. And
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, with the wildfires raging across California, we know that Los Angeles in particular are very, very badly affected. Well, who has put out a statement on this? Guess who? Guess who? Harry and Meghan. They have urged people to check in on disabled and elderly neighbours. If you feel compelled to help, here are some resources and ideas. Apparently, if you feel you want to help people who've been affected by these horrendous wildfires, you will go to sussex.com and find out different ideas from Harry and Meghan. I can think of no two better people to give me ideas on how to help my neighbours. If you feel compelled to help, here are some resources and ideas. They also encourage people to open their home to others affected and to donate to the American Red Cross. No word as to whether they will be opening their home to people. On their website, they said if a friend, loved one or pet has to evacuate and you're able to offer them a safe haven in your home, please do. And be sure to check in with any disabled or elderly neighbours to see if they need help evacuating. I would argue they've been through enough for the wildfires without offering that service to them. Listen, I'm not making light of this at all. But what I am saying is that, really, Meghan, read the room, seriously. Is this the best thing? They are being contacted in areas, including Montecito. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have lived in a high fire risk property for 5 years, and they of course live there with Archie, who's 5, and Lilibet, who's 3. If the couple could even have to leave their home, a power cut could be affecting them. But yeah, they're advising people how to deal with things, checking in on disabled or elderly neighbours. Maybe they're doing a good thing, maybe that's all right, maybe that's something they should be doing, using their public profile to do so, but I would just question slightly whether people in California need advice from Harry and Meghan on this particular issue. But let me know your thoughts, 0344 499 1000. One person who I don't think would be particularly welcome back in the United Kingdom, aside from Meghan and Harry, and I'm not comparing the two, is Shamiha Begum. But there are quite a few people who've been in touch on this. This is a call from Trump's terror chief, a man called Sebastian Gorka, who's been interviewed on this channel before, who says, take back ISIS Britons. He says that we should take back Shamiha Begum and others who have said that they want to destroy our way of life and that they should be brought back from Syria. Andrew says, evening Peter, happy new year. With regards to taking back our own from these radicalised jihadis, if we do or did, there should be in the same day shipping out all foreign prisoners from our prisons to their own countries. See ya, bye. Brian says, you should have reminded your previous guest who repeatedly and wrongly stated that Shamiha Begum was trafficked and taken. She was not. She went voluntarily at an age she knew exactly what she was doing. She should never set foot in the UK again, says Brian. I would be very happy if Shamiha Begum never set foot in the UK again, I must say, or alternatively spent the rest of her life in prison. I don't have any sympathy for her. She was a jihadi bride. She was 15 years old. Look, we all make huge mistakes in our youth, but she knew it was wrong. She knew doing what she was doing and being a jihadi, and just because she's, better looking than some 17-year-old with a big beard, well, that doesn't mean we should bring her back. And that is basically the reasoning of a lot of the liberal left, quite frankly. I know that sounds flippant, but it's not. Quite a few other people getting in touch about this as well, including Ben from Guildford, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Ben, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say about Shamiha Begum?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I would disagree with a couple of things that I just said. I disagree with the guy who said she was, could be seen as a 12-year-old, and at her age.
Well, she was 15 when she left Britain to become a jihadi bride. Yeah,
the age of adult prosecution than it is child prosecution. I think we actually do have a responsibility to take her back, but not give her her liberty. She should spend as many years as it takes to be completely de-radicalised to the extent that every single organisation is happy with that.
She's arguing now and arguing legally that she is de-radicalised. She made a mistake. She wants to come back to the UK, but she's had her citizenship taken away from her.
Well, then I think we need to put her in jail. There has to be a way to do it. I don't think we can just be on the world stage denying our responsibilities, and she's one of...
Do we honestly have a responsibility towards someone who wants to destroy our way of life?
Well, that's a dangerous question, Peter. We've got quite a few in this country. Yes, I believe if she has to return, which is one thing, if she has to return, I don't care what happens to her. She has to come back on her own way. I've got no sympathy for the woman. But I think if people have to be returned to their countries of origins and everyone is taking that on board, I think we have to do the same thing. Okay. And I also think, especially with the Trump pressure, I mean, going against Donald Trump, I was out there working as a journalist on his election, and he is a powerhouse of a man, and we need that special relationship because there's so many geopolitical conflicts that are on a hot button at the moment in the world, and England can't defend itself, and the West can't defend itself without the American military umbrella.
Okay, Ben.
And I really don't think that Keir Starmer's the person to make that special relationship great again. But on the Burnham issue, I think we need to be able to find some. If we do have to take her back, we need to be able to find some way to imprison her. Okay. Just because she's de-radicalised.
Yeah, well, why would you necessarily believe her? Ben, thank you for your thoughts. Appreciate that. Pat's been in touch and says, how convenient for Rachel Reeves to have booked to go to China instead of attend that question in the House of Commons, that urgent question. She was afraid. Well, she hasn't actually gone to China yet. She could have gone to that urgent question, but she sent her deputy. She ducked out of it, essentially. Maybe she was doing something incredibly important, but I doubt it. She was afraid to talk on economics and her actions on borrowing. I believe my son or other people with the same degree can do a better job with his or their degree on economics. She needs to be sacked. Michelle says, what's wrong with the show trial? That's what the so-called rioters got. What's good for the goose and all of that, Peter? Jane says, I wonder whether the Tories didn't implement the recommendations from the Alexis J report because Labour probably would not want to discuss them before the election. That's a very interesting point from Jane as well. On the gangs and the paedophile gangs, John has been in touch from Peterhead in the Scottish Highlands. John, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say on this?
Good evening, Peter. How are you?
I'm okay. Go ahead, John.
I agree that we don't need another public inquiry. It's a lot of hand-wringing and head-shaking, and we're going to learn lessons. I want to see, personally, a team of investigators with no skin in the game that have got the power to turn over any rock they want, and I want to see every councillor, policeman, social worker that covered this up in shackles, taken away in tears and with the TV cameras to see it. And I think that's what the victims deserve. Okay. They don't need to go on another 5 years because it's just going to be like the post office inquiry. Paula Bennells has still got a nice £3 million pension. She should be in prison. There's no accountability with these public inquiries. Nobody goes to jail.
And we keep being told lessons are learned, we keep being told things will change, and a lot of people feel that they haven't. John, thank you. He's in the Scottish Highlands. I think that was perhaps not his place of origin. Welsh accent there, I think. Richard in Rotherham has given me a ring as well, 0344 499 1000. Richard, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter, you okay?
Yeah, all well, thanks. Hope you are too, Richard.
Yeah, not too bad. I think one of the big reasons that maybe the Labour Party don't want to push for an inquiry at the moment is they're more concerned with what's coming up with their Islamophobia description and bill. Kemi in the House of Parliament the other day
highlighted the fact that...
And it was disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful what she highlighted. And this is, as Richard correctly says, that since March 2019, the Labour Party's position of the definition and examples include a warning that even saying Asian grooming gangs was a modern iteration of age-old stereotypes. I mean, that's just not true.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a big problem. I think we've got a couple of issues here in Rotherham where we've got, this is an issue where we're hidden and we're being told to be quiet for such a long time, and not discussed for fear of being called a bigot or a racist, and this will only make things worse.
Did you see that in action in Rotherham, Richard? Were you told that yourself, or were you aware of people being told that don't discuss this? It's racist to discuss this.
Basically, it's commonplace. And you know what? Put a challenge to it. I know you said on your show before that you ought to go out on the road and come to some local places. Why don't you up on a train, you and Son and Times, and come over and do vox pops around here? Yeah. You'll get a really good feedback. You'll see a lot of hatred from the left, because the left is really powerful over here, and you'll see certain communities just hidden in silos, just working so not integrating. And this is a really sad state of affairs for the town and for the country. It's a really bad place. I mean, Sarah Champion, I think she's done great work in the past, but I disagree with what she's done with voting against the looking in again to these crimes that have been done. And I do think your last caller had a point, which was we need to know everybody from doctors, nurses, health professionals, social workers, council, policemen, everybody had a finger in this pie and helped cover it up. And that can only be done by a brand new inquiry.
Okay. Richard, you make some really good points there, and thank you for the invitation as well. I was certainly talking about Boss about that and what we can do to reflect this, because it's a huge story. It's an important story, and listen, I think the Sun and the Times, certainly with Andrew Norfolk, they're a senior reporter years ago. In fact, he's retired now from 2011, did some really, really good reporting on all of this. Of course, you know, the Sun and the Times are all part of the same group that owns Talk as well. Thank you to Jason in the Lake District, who says, I'm no Nostradamus, but I can accurately predict there will be a winter crisis in the NHS for 25, 26, 27, 28, and pretty much every year after that, until someone is brave enough to start sacking management who aren't currently held accountable for annual failures and disgraceful mismanagement. This person, well, I'll read that out actually on a little bit later on, but thank you to everybody who has been in touch. We're going to talk in just a second to Laurie Laird. She's an economist. She's going to break this all down to us and what's happening in the economy, why we need to be worried. Ross Clark is with us as well, and we'll talk anti-Semitism. Stay with us.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. There's loads to talk about this evening, not just the ongoing debate over paedophile gangs, but also the economy and the fact that there does seem to be an awful lot of trouble with the bond markets. That means the price of debt is going up. That means mortgages, and if you want to take out a loan or something, that is getting more expensive as time goes on. The government's in a real bind here, and there was a big urgent question today in the House of Commons. We'll see a bit of that in a second. We'll get the latest on this from Laurie Laird, who's an economist and political commentator who can break it all down, tell us why it matters for you, and also Ross Clark, who's a columnist at The Sun. Harry and Meghan have told people in California to check in on disabled and elderly neighbours. Maybe that's a good thing, or perhaps those people say, yeah, we're doing that already and we don't need you to tell us to open our homes to other people. Will they be opening their homes? That's what we don't know. Also, on those California wildfires, who's to blame? Well, of course, it's the Jews, because there are some mad pro-Gaza, pro-crazy, talking about genocide all the time when it's not a genocide people who say that honestly, they're making the argument that because more money is being given to Israel to deal with Hamas terrorists, well, actually, that is leading to and involving the California wildfires. There's a crazy video there on the internet. We're going to play that to you and get reaction from Gary Maund, who's the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. It's just crazy anti-Semitism. It's everywhere. It's affecting the political debate on both sides of the Atlantic. It's disgraceful, and we need to talk about it. I want to hear what you have to say about all these issues. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note or a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Well, a bit earlier on in the House of Commons, the Conservatives were granted an urgent question. What happens if there's a big debate, something happening that's really important to talk about quickly? And Mel Stride, who is the Shadow Chancellor, he of course ran for the Conservative leadership. Well, he's now the Shadow Chancellor, and he said this is such an important issue that an urgent question needed to be asked. He wanted to talk to the Chancellor. She mysteriously was not available. Maybe she had a good excuse, but she sent her deputy, and this is what Mel Stride's message for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was.
Where is the Chancellor? It is a bitter regret that at this difficult time of these serious issues, she herself is nowhere to be seen. Mr. Speaker, in the last 48 hours, borrowing costs have reached a 27-year high, and it is the Chancellor's decisions that have led us here.
Well, the Chancellor wasn't there. Her deputy, Darren Jones, was. He's Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He defended Labour's record.
He talked about the debt burden this country has. Maybe we should just reflect a little as to why we have so much debt. It's because pre-pandemic, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the burden of debt inherited by this government from the party opposite from 2010 onwards, why did the last government have to borrow so much money every single month? Every single month, not just to invest, but to pay the day-to-day bills? Because of an absolute failure to get growth into the economy. They could not make the numbers add up. They've stacked up the country's credit card. They've left it to this party to deal with, and we are going to deal with it. That is why these fiscal rules are non-negotiable. That is why public spending will be within the number set out at the budget. We're starting the spending review now. It will conclude in June. Public services will have to live within their means. The Chancellor has been very, very clear about that. And that's why, with this government, you get economic stability, absolute clarity on public spending, and that is why the British people trust this party and booted that lot out of office.
Darren Jones there, who is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, basically the Deputy Chancellor, filling in for us boss Rachel Reeves, who had other things to do rather than have, basic parliamentary accountability. But that was Darren Jones replying to Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor there. Let's work this out. Let's talk about why this matters with Laurie Laird, who is an economist and political commentator, and Ross Clark, who's a columnist at The Sun. Laurie, break this down for us. Why does this matter? Because the gilt markets are something that perhaps are not exactly familiar to many people, but if the cost of debt and the cost of government debt is high, that has implications for every single person in this country.
Yeah, it does, Peter. And I'm just sort of chuckling at Darren Jones, looking really uncomfortable in Parliament today. But gilt years are essentially what the government has to pay to borrow money. The government spends a lot more than it takes in tax receipts. It's got to go borrow it. The way it borrows it is by packaging its debt into something called a gilt, and people go and buy this stuff. The gilts can last for 2 years, up to 30 years. Type of people who buy this, maybe you if you have a pension fund.
Would you like to buy my debt, Laurie? Would you like? I'll do a good rate.
Well, this is a relevant question. It depends on the interest. It depends how risky a borrower I think that you are. And clearly, the more that I'm going to lend you in this hypothetical world, the higher interest rate I'm going to demand for you, because the more I lend to you, the more risky.
I wasn't proposing that I would pay you back for it. You could just buy it and then just have it. Be responsible for my debt. Yes.
That's a whole different sort of deal. But the presumption here is that the UK government will ultimately pay this back, but because it's incurring so much more debt than people expected, people who are buying this stuff, taking it off the government's hands, are saying, wait a second, you're borrowing a lot more, you become a little more risky. We are demanding a higher yield, a higher return on our loan for the risk that we're incurring lending to you than, say, Germany, which has a lower budget deficit. So that's why these yields are rising. Now, the second part of your question, it sounds esoteric when we talk about it this way, but almost everything that we borrow, if you say you have a mortgage, if you have any sort of medium to long-term debt, say anything that you're borrowing 4 or 5 years or beyond, that tends to be keyed off government debt rather than the Bank of England's bank rate. That's a real short-term rate. Typically, the Bank of England's rate and market rates move in concert, but not at this time. So we're in this weird situation where the Bank of England has signaled it's going to move rates down, not as quickly as people would like, but the markets, because of this extra government debt, anyone who is issuing this debt is keying off this longer-term market debt. So if you've got a mortgage, your mortgage rate is more than likely going to go up. A car loan, credit card debt. So that's why all of this stuff, as geeky and pointy-headed as it sounds, is really relevant to all of us.
Politically, Ross, how much trouble do you think Rachel Reeves is in?
Well, she's in a tremendous amount of trouble. I mean, her great sell to the nation was that Labour were going to be the party of fiscal responsibility. And it's falling apart for her as it fell apart for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng after the mini-budget in 2022. Borrowing costs, long 10-year borrowing costs, are now higher than they were after that budget, and that was seen as a tremendous disaster crisis at the time, and Labour made great hay out of that, and now Rachel Reeves, having said she's going to look after the public finances in a far more responsible way, is in similar sort of soup, really. But I mean, the problem didn't begin with Liz Truss, it's to begin with Rachel Reeves. The fact is that no UK government of either colour has balanced the books for 22 years now. Year on year, have been piling on debt, building it up, and the while interest rates were, at rock bottom, virtually zero, nobody cared too much. It's like, oh, well, it's so easy and cheap to borrow money. Who cares? Let's borrow more and more and more and invest it and so on. But those ultra low interest rates were pretty well obviously not going to last, and we're out of that sort of era of zero interest rates now. We're in a far more sort of normal era of interest rates, if you like, and the government's spending over £100 billion now just servicing its debt. And you think we could have another 2/3 of an NHS if we weren't spending all this money simply servicing the debt.
And speaking of the kind of choices that Rachel Reeves is going to have to make, Laurie, presumably public services may be cut. What do you think happens now, especially as we go into this very important political and economic period of a spending review?
Absolutely, and she is going to have to face everybody at the end of March with new updated forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. She has insisted that this is not a fiscal event. She's simply going to present those forecasts. But if we continue to see interest rates creep up, and I think we may have topped out here, won't swear to that, but I think that we've probably seen the worst of it. But even if we have interest rates at this kind of a level, as Ross pointed out, our debt payment is huge. It's bigger than the education budget. She may well be faced with a situation, despite saying she's not coming back for more taxes, more tax dollars, more tax pounds. Sorry about this, but she may have to do something. Now, I suspect she would probably go for belt tightening rather than revenue raising. I think she's still sort of licking her wounds from the last budget, and she didn't raise personal taxes there. Not to a great extent. That was mostly on the business world. But she may have to come back with some measures at the end of March, certainly before the autumn budget, where she either is going to raise revenues or cut spending somewhere.
Ross, what do you think happens next?
Well, I mean, another thing Labour said, Rachel Reeves said, we're only going to have one budget a year. Well, it now looks as if she might be forced to have another sort of mini budget in March.
Well, it's fascinating you mentioned that, because Darren Jones, of course, said in that clip we heard the fiscal rules are non-negotiable. Do you think that is a position that's going to hold, Ross?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we've got this lovely phrase, fiscal headroom, which you're going to hear a lot about in current weeks. I mean, that's basically the sort of safety margin, if you like, between what the government's borrowing. But, we will get to March. We will probably have to have some kind of rearrangement of the rules. Can she relax her fiscal rules? And probably, that'll be a bit difficult, shifting the goalposts. Well, Gordon Brown used to do it all the time, but Rachel Reeves might be a bit shy of moving her fiscal goalposts. The other alternatives, to raise more taxes. Well, she said she wasn't going to do that. Does she cut spending? Well, that's not very popular, is it, with voters? And at the same time, she probably will come up with some cuts. But at the same time, what was one of her first moves in coming into office was to award a fat pay rise to public sector workers without any conditions for increasing productivity. That has added this huge sort of slice of extra spending year on year. And she talked about this 22 billion black hole left by the Conservatives. Well, actually 9 billion of that was imposed by herself. That was the effect of her pay rises.
I totally agree with you, Ross, although I just know she would argue certainly that there was no option but to accept those recommendations, blah blah blah. Laurie and Ross, thank you both very, very much indeed. Laurie Laird, their economic and political commentator, and Ross Clark, columnist for The Sun. Thank you also to this person who said a month or so ago you had a woman on the phone, I think from the Sheffield area. She became noticeably upset during the phone call on air. I was wondering if you had an update on her and if she's doing okay during this cold spell. That was Teresa from Leicester, actually, rather than Sheffield, but not too far away, and she says okay. We had a huge reaction to that story, and it is a reminder that really, when we talk about things like bond yields and gilts and stuff like that, I mean, it might seem quite pie in the sky, but it does have a real effect, and how much money there is in the economy and how much money people receive really does matter, especially this winter when it is very cold. We did check in with Teresa. We made sure she's okay, and I want to respect her privacy by not giving the full detail of exactly what sort of thing was put in place by her family and so on, but Teresa is okay, and thank you for that. We actually spoke to her just before Christmas. I checked in with a couple of people on my weekend shows who had made a very, very big impact, and Teresa actually, really a huge admiration for her for saying that she didn't want any of the money that anybody was offering her, and many people were offering her money, in fact offering to pay her bills for a year and things like that, but instead wanted donations to a charity which helps elderly people. So really a wonderful thing and a good ending to that very sad story as well, which is fine now, and she will be warm this winter. Starmer's now crashed the economy worse than Truss. That is the view of Stewart. Regarding the jihadi bride, Shamiha Begum, no, we should not have her back. Why should we pay to keep her in isolation? Just no, says Chaz in Sussex. We'll continue talking about that and also what Meghan and Harry have said about the California wildfires. Stay with us here on Talk.
I'm slightly puzzled as to why we have to go through it all again in the House of Commons with political parties, both the major political parties, it seems to be posturing without any particular signs of sincerity. I'm not at all sure that another inquiry is going to make life that much harder for the perpetrators. And I'm not absolutely sure why it is we're discussing this, apart from the desire of certain American persons to intervene in our politics for reasons I don't fully understand.
Yes, I mean, it is kind of ironic that we are discussing it really as a result of Elon Musk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
What's happening in California is absolutely dreadful. At least 5 wildfires are raging in the Los Angeles area. The 2 largest cover more than 27,000 acres. Authorities are really failing to contain these. One resident says it's like Armageddon. The whole of the Palisades is gone, huge area. Fire broke out in the Hollywood Hills on Wednesday near the Hollywood sign itself. Buildings along Sunset Boulevard are in ruins. We've had loads of people affected, ordinary members of the public, as well as the stars who live there, people like Billy Crystal, Paris Hilton, Ricky Lake, among the stars who've lost their homes. 5 people are confirmed dead. More than 137 people have had their homes evacuated. And really, it is really a dreadful situation. We're reflecting that with Caroline Faraday, who's a journalist in Los Angeles, as well as the fact that Harry and Meghan have now issued a statement on the California fires as well. They're urging people to check in on disabled and elderly neighbours. If you feel compelled to help, here are some resources and ideas. I must say, if my home was being ravaged by wildfires, I probably wouldn't be going onto sussex.com as my first step in that process. They're encouraging people to open their home to others affected and donate to the American Red Cross. Caroline, thank you for joining us. Do we know if Harry and Meghan have opened their home to people.
You are cheeky. Thank you for giving me a good laugh in the middle of something that is so horrifically traumatic for everybody here in LA, because we're all in this moment of trauma. But God bless Meghan for inserting herself into it somehow.
Tell us about you. Tell us about what you're seeing and hearing in Los Angeles, and what how close are you to these wildfires?
Yeah, so I live in LA County, and I live in the area that was affected by the Woolsey fire, which happened in 2018, which went through Malibu then, and that was fairly horrific. And wildfires are something that we are aware of in California, but for anyone who is thinking, well, they get these here? No, not like this, not this way. This is an urban area. Of these wildfires, when they happen, they start, in more sort of forest areas, that kind of thing. This is ripping through communities, people's homes. This is like it ripping through. I'm going to use Bromley as an example, but do you know what I mean? A very heavily populated, nice,
very densely populated area,
suburban area with a slightly nicer beach than Bromley has. But this is places people go, restaurants that people go to. One of just this lovely, lovely restaurant that's been there for like 36 years. I say lovely, not fancy. It's like a shack on the beach that serves fresh fish, and you go up to the counter. It's real like LA kind of icon, really, called the Real Inn. Burnt to the ground, and everything along the Pacific Coast Highway, from what I've seen, is razed to the ground. And the reporters that I'm watching right in the thick of it have been in tears, Peter. These, how often do you watch the news and people are reporting on the toughest of circumstances, and journalists in the thick of it? To see these reporters in tears. These are thousands of homes. It is, when we talk about it covering 17,000 acres, that's not 17,000 acres of forest land. That is 17,000 acres of a community where people live. That's the Palisades fire. Then we've got the Eaton fire to the other side of town. 10,600 acres, and everybody in LA, myself, my friends, my colleagues, every single one of us knows people that are impacted. There are thousands and thousands of people who are not in their homes right now. They have had to drop their pets at animal shelters because where they are sheltering can't take their animals. They're separated from their pets.
Is there
all this panic.
And that's dreadful, and I can only imagine the emotional toll that all of that has on people. Caroline, is there any sense that the authorities have any sense of control, that there is any way this is being contained in any way?
I, in my reporting role, spend a lot of time with particularly the fire service in California, and they are the best in the world. I see the training they go through and what they go through. And these guys are in the front line of this, and honestly, Peter, they are absolute heroes. When they go in, and even when these houses are catching fire, they're picking things up and carrying them out. Grandfather clocks, photo albums, anything they can save, they are doing their best. But here is what they are held back by. Nearly 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts. So normally in a situation where a fire breaks out, they get these big tankers. And it's very impressive to watch when you watch it happen. They drop fire retardant. They get a perimeter around the fire. That is when you see those figures that are called containment. That doesn't mean that the fire is under control. It means that they've got a perimeter around it and that they're confident it's not going to spread further. These fires are currently at 0% containment because they can't get their aeroplanes up to get the retardant down, and they would normally, particularly if it's in a forest, they just dig this big old trench around it, and that provides like a fire break. They can't do these things. This is absolutely unprecedented. So they've had to try and use water from hydrants in the street. Those hydrants are just not up to it. They are not there to provide that amount of water to that much of a raging inferno, and they're not up to it. So there's this problem with the water pressure, the lack of air support. We've still got today, and the winds have dropped, 60-mile-an-hour winds. Tomorrow, those winds are going back up again. So there's no sense that this is something that happened yesterday. This is something that's happening now. It's going to continue happening tomorrow. People are still going to be out of their homes, losing their homes, looking on like their Ring cameras to find out whether their homes are still
there. Caroline,
I walked around my own... Sorry, I was just going to say I walked around my own house today because people go, are you safe? Are you okay? I'm holding my breath, hoping that my house is something I can go home to tonight, and counting my blessings.
And that's just an awful feeling to have, Caroline. And we really feel for you and everyone in Los Angeles. I wonder, you know, everything you've talked about there is very practical. It's to do with facts. It's to do with the situation that is there. Is there any sense that any of the celebrities who have offered their sort of thoughts and prayers-y kind of things, like Meghan and Harry, is making any difference whatsoever? Are people taking any form of comfort from it? Or are they actually saying, do you know what, there's so much practically we need to think about this devastating effects here, not just on Los Angeles, but in America generally as they cope with these fires?
People like to think that they've done something to help, because you do feel helpless in a situation like this. So... I guess there's an element of that with terms of the Sussexes where they are. You know, they're not impacted by this. They haven't even got the winds up there, and they do seem to do their own thing of inserting themselves when various news events happen.
I can't believe you would make such an outrageous allegation.
I'm not qualified enough in psychology to be able to diagnose the reasons that they feel to do that. However, I do think that what I've noticed when I am out and about is that and talking to people who are out of their homes, everybody, there seems to be this human condition that is quite moving, in that people do seem to say, I'm badly off, I've lost my home, but there's somebody worse off than me. And that is quite extraordinary to me in these circumstances, and that is what I have encountered, and that is something. So, yeah, dissing of the celebs aside, you know, we've all got family mementos to walk around your home and decide what you're going to take and what you're not going to take. And will you ever see that picture your kid drew you and then trying to explain it to your kid? Like, those things are real, no matter whether you're Billy Crystal or Billy Jones, right?
Yeah,
that doesn't change.
Thank you, Caroline. Really appreciate your perspective on that. Caroline Faraday there, a journalist in Los Angeles. And Jane has been in touch to say, of course, Meghan and Harry have announced this today on Kate's birthday. They couldn't have helped others behind the scenes, but that isn't them. They've got to be demonstrative about it. Brittany says, that's rich coming from Harry and Meghan. They're the most self-centred people ever. Perhaps anyone in Parliament who wants Shamiha Begum can put them in her house, put her in their house and look after her, says that texter. Jay says, with the crowd's mood in the room, I'm surprised they haven't given Shamiha Begum the right to a family life, as they have with serial rapists and child abusers. Thank you to Gary. He says, of course Starmer is going to have to hold a national inquiry into these grooming gangs. He really has no choice, because the demand for one is going to keep mounting. I think I agree with you, Gary, to be honest. All he is desperately trying to do now is avoid it looking as if he is given into pressure from Elon Musk, from Reform UK, from the Conservatives, by finding a way to launch a national inquiry without it looking like he is given into this pressure. My guess is that he will announce a number of regional investigations that will be put together in a consolidated report, say in 2 years' time, carefully avoiding the use of the words national or inquiry. Then he will try to take credit for it all being his idea. Gary, I think that's all very sensible, and I think we could be in a position where that happens, or a version of that happens. Ali says there's no need to call for a public inquiry. What it should be called is a complete investigation into rape gangs, who covered it up from the lowest person to the Prime Minister, who in fact covered this all up, an investigation into the rape gangs, not an inquiry. Jane says perhaps a way of getting some accountability and inquiry is for Maggie Oliver to be in charge of it, handpick who she wants. If people donated money to her foundation, she could do this with public help. Just a thought. Snowy says, afternoon, Peter. Great programme and topics as always. With regards to the rape gangs, like one of your earlier callers, I've been saying the same for weeks. Don't have another inquiry, but organise a completely independent investigation carried out by a dedicated police task force who have no skin in the game. Officers from Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, who have complete power to investigate and interview all parties involved. They should also have the power to arrest and charge anybody found to be responsible or complicit in this disgusting scandal in our country involving so many innocent young girls. I'm not holding my breath. Anne in North London says, yet more Orwellian newspeak, change of the word meaning. Phobia means an irrational fear of. This is in regard to the debate over Islamophobia and what that should mean and be. Will it be an offence to have fear, says Anne in North London? Bill says, did you see Darren Jones in Question Time a few weeks back? He's still deluded in his belief that Labour are doing a good job, but then Harmer Starmer, his boss, is deluded too. Lots of people getting in touch on Rachel Reeves, including Stuart, who says, with Reeves always targeting pensioners, the 2026 triple lock is at risk to help balance the books. And Clive in Solihull, with his usual refrain at the end of his messages, says, did Darren Jones just say the people of this country trust Labour to sort the economy out? He did indeed. What planet is he on, says Clive. Has he not seen the opinion polls? Labour and their charlatan of a leader are the most unpopular government in history. Rachel, from accounts, is clearly drowning in her own incompetence and won't even face the Commons. She needs to go now and be replaced by a grown-up with some proper experience and judgment. Mind you, that might be difficult. Vote reform, says Clive in Solihull. Thank you to Clive for that. Well, we've heard about the LA fires a second ago. Who do you think's to blame for them? I promise you, there's a pro-Gaza activist who says it's all about Israel. We're through the looking glass here, and we're going to find out why in just a second on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I am always happy to correct myself when errors have been made. Apparently, Peterhead is not in the Highlands of Scotland. It's only about 30 miles north of Aberdeen, according to Wayne, who's been in touch. So thank you very much indeed. My English, Scottish, Welsh geography is pretty rubbish. Irish geography also not that good, so apologies for that. But I was told by the people behind the glass here, I'm afraid I'm going to blame for this one, that Peterhead was in the Highlands, but it's apparently not in the Highlands. So there we are, a piece of geography sorted out. Aberdeen is great. In fact, there's a little village, a little town really, near Aberdeen called Stonehaven, which I think is probably my favourite place in the world. It is lovely. I had a friend at university who lived there, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Right then, we've been talking about Los Angeles and the horrendous fires that are happening there. Some people, I promise you, including someone who's in Congress recently, a protester with that keffiyeh, that sort of pro-Palestinian protester with a pro-Palestinian scarf, basically, are linking the destruction of people's lives in Los Angeles to Gaza. I mean, this is just beyond the looking glass here, and we're just going to look at this bizarre video that's been posted online and then get reaction from Gary Maughan, who's the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. Let's have a look at this nonsense.
We just left the California Senate office of Alex Padilla, whose state is being ravaged by fires and the climate disaster. And at the same time, Congress is set to pass $8 billion more to Israel to continue to bomb and obliterate people in Gaza. We are drawing the parallels where people in communities in California are being evacuated from their homes, and people in Gaza have been evacuated from their homes for the past 15 months. Instead of funding more devastation and destruction, we need to be putting that money into constituents, whether they are from California, whether they are from Minnesota, Appalachia. Every bomb that goes off is being tested and built on sacrifice zones in this country, on indigenous land. We need that money for climate reparations, for healthcare, for housing, instead of going to further climate collapse and further the devastation and genocide of the people in Gaza. And so we are here today making the connections between the climate crisis, between endless militarism, that genocide is ecocide, and that we need to put that money into constituents and communities here at home.
Genocide is ecocide, apparently. Gary Mond is the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. First of all, it's not a genocide. It is factually not a genocide, what is happening in Gaza. Factually, that is wrong. Gary, what do you make of this clown?
Well, firstly, our hearts go out to the families of those who've lost their lives and who've been injured and who've been massively displaced by this absolute horrendous disaster in California. I think that has to be said to start with. But to actually link what's happened in California with what's going on in Israel is ludicrous. What is happening is there is a war going on where Israel is seeking to wipe out a terrorist organization that was initially responsible for murdering 1,250 people back on the 7th of October last year, and could easily bring an end to the war by simply surrendering and releasing all the hostages it holds. And the actual idea to make a comparison between the two is insanity. There's no other words for it. I should also add that you might have heard that former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has actually, who's now the editor of The Spectator, has actually said that the Israel Defense Forces deserve to win a Nobel Peace Prize for their contribution to peace. And he's right.
I missed that one. That will certainly be another controversial statement from him. Very interesting. And I mean, I just wonder about the mentality of these people. I mean, people have just lost their minds over what's happening in Gaza, especially people who, I mean, it was a really, really interesting article. I expect you read it. In fact, we might have even had you on to comment about it by a reporter for The Times who talked about the attitudes of people in Gaza to Hamas and the fact that there's so many of them who really hate Hamas, who don't want Hamas to be in charge. But of course, that's not convenient for those lefty, tree-hugging, you know, ecocide, climate disaster, climate catastrophe people who linking all this together in this bizarre word soup like the person we just watched there.
Well, the attitude of people living in Gaza, I think, has changed over time. Sadly, back in October last year, Hamas were seen as winners, and they enjoyed massive support from the ordinary people of Gaza, many of whom were actually affiliated with Hamas. Over time, they've been seen to be doing less well and are now losing. And so those who are opposed to Hamas are starting to speak with louder voices. And of course, the only ultimate solution here is for Hamas to be removed and for all the people of Gaza, especially the younger people, to be properly educated so that they can in future live in peace with their neighbouring Israelis.
Gary, I wonder if I can ask you about the fact that the Metropolitan Police has actually used its powers under the Public Order Act to prevent the Palestine Solidarity Campaign forming its march in the vicinity of a synagogue. This is in central London, ahead of its planned protest on the 18th of January. Finally, the Metropolitan Police seems to have actually done something, and we both know, and everybody watching, listening to this programme who has a thought in their head will know that if the Palestine Solidarity Campaign starts its march outside a synagogue, there's going to be a trouble.
Yes, to my mind, this is one cheer out of three. Yes, it is good news that the march is going to be rerouted and that the Met are going to ensure that it is rerouted. And I would just say the Chief Rabbi and Claudia Mendoza at the Jewish Leadership Council have done a great job in that regard. But to get 3 cheers, we actually have to stop the marches altogether. They are simply anti-Semitic provocations. They're not campaigning for Palestine. They're campaigning against Jews. That's what it's been about since day one. And by the way, for 2 cheers, we could actually have some static demonstrations. That does preserve an element of freedom of speech, but actually reduces the risk still further. But to get 3 cheers, I want to see those marches stopped altogether.
Gary, have you got your copy of Jewish News this week?
I have read some elements of Jewish News. What are you referring to specifically?
Have you read a brilliant opinion piece by a young whippersnapper called Peter Cardwell?
I have to apologise to you.
There's a piece in Jewish News this week. Have a look in your copy about anti-Semitism in Ireland. It is absolutely disgraceful what's happened there. I'm sure you're aware of President Michael D. Higgins and the fact that he and the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, and the Foreign Affairs Minister, none of them put out anything to do with Hanukkah. They put it out for all sorts of different festivals on their social media. Nothing to do with Hanukkah. Ireland is probably, as you know far better than I do, one of the most pro-Palestinian countries in the world, and there is unfortunately so much anti-Semitism there. We've talked about it in this programme. But yes, I have an article in Jewish News, so you can have a look at that, Gary. But listen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Good to talk to you. That's Gary Mullen there, Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. We'll take your calls after the break. You want to get your call in, use the break to give us a ring. 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 7. Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 10. But in the meantime, have a chat with me. 0344 499 1000.
Sleepy Joe Biden proved to everyone that he has what it takes to be president. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Kamala Harris, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. Take a look at what happened. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
The debate on where Peterhead is, whether it's in the Scottish Highlands or whether it isn't. Apparently it isn't. Apparently it's only about 30 miles north of Aberdeen, which is not in the Highlands. Graham has been in touch and said, I thought Peterhead was at the top of Peter's shoulders. Eee! give the man a coconut. Thank you to Christopher, who has been in touch to say one reason the terrible fires are so bad is that the Governor of California refused to allow the California Fire Services to clear the dead wood and do controlled burns because the idiots from the lefty Greens told him it would destroy land for small mammals and ground birds along with insects that would have been more controllable if this had been done. Also, another person been in touch to say, we were speaking to my brother-in-law yesterday. He's in San Francisco. He said he texted a friend to see how he is in Los Angeles. His friend had a 7,000 square foot house fronting the ocean worth $10 to $20 million. He replied to say that they have left the house and gone to a hotel. They're not expecting to find the house standing when they get back to it. Goodness me. I get all sorts of messages in this job, but I think this one takes the biscuit. Certainly, this is the weirdest one I've received so far this year. From this person, who says, "Hi Peter, do you have literally any justification for supporting grooming gangs beyond wearing something pink and making snide references to the aggravated and organised crimes you're covering up to protect them?" And this is under a picture of me wearing a pink shirt. I would have thought every single programme that I have done this year, every single word I have said in almost every programme would have made it abundantly clear that I am completely against these gangs. What they do is absolutely abhorrent, and they should be stopped immediately from what they're doing, both by the force of the law and by whatever it is that politicians can do. We can debate, of course, what the right thing for politicians to do is, whether that's an inquiry, whether that's a big inquiry, a big national inquiry, or a more localised inquiry. You do get some strange messages when you're sort of in this position. It's a huge privilege to be in this position, to speak to you as often as I do, to take the calls, texts and tweets. And the next one is from Dave in Staffordshire. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Still time to get your call in, actually, between now and 7. But let's talk to Dave. Thank you for your call, Dave. What would you like to say? Good evening to you.
Good evening, sir. Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year.
I've just seen on GB News about Andy Burnham calling for an inquiry. What a man. I remember years ago he was at the front in the Manchester Arena bombings. I reckon you've got a future leader of the Labour Party there.
I think a number of people might actually agree with you. We can actually play that clip now. Andy Burnham is I'll come back to you once we've played the clip, Dave, so just hold your horses just for a second. Andy Burnham was talking to BBC Radio Manchester a bit earlier today. He has called for a national inquiry. This is what the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, had to say a bit earlier today.
In my view, the government was right to reject that form of opportunism. But I did hear last night, coming out of that debate, ministers saying they are open to discussing issues now with survivors. And I will have my voice into this and say, I do think there is the case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned and the one we've seen in Rotherham, the one we've seen in Telford, to draw out some of these national issues and compel people to give evidence who then may have charges to answer and be held to account. That is something I couldn't do at my level.
He's talking about the fact that as Mayor of Greater Manchester, he's not able to call for a national inquiry, but he's not able to create one, but he is saying that his party leader, Keir Starmer, should create that. And you agree with him, Dave?
I do indeed, yeah. It's nice to know that somebody, isn't that what democracy is? He should be able to stand up to his leader and say, this is what we want. Yeah, exactly. And you agree with him? You think that's the right plan? I do, yeah, because, I'd never even heard of the whip in Parliament. If they were that confident they were going to win it, why didn't they have a free vote? They ought to have a free vote anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, and certainly the Conservatives' amendment yesterday didn't go down too well. Why do you think an inquiry is needed, Dave? What would your thoughts be around the national inquiry rather than a more local inquiry? Because I've heard arguments on both sides of this, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure where my opinion is. I think there are merits in both of them. Maybe they should just both happen or be married up together. What's your view on this, Dave? Well, I think it was one of your shows. Somebody was saying it's a bit like marking your own homework. Yeah, Because if some of them people in these towns, I'm not saying everyone because it's been going on for decades, but if there's still people in power there, they're not going to want it, are they? So they're going to try and derail it or be awkward. Or I think you need, like people have said, you need to be able to compel people and give evidence under oath.
Yeah,
including police officers. Because the trouble is, there are things going. I mean, all these things with these really famous rich people, like it was only when eventually it came out and other people started to speak up, because they're all scared of them.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it.
If your boss was involved and you're lower down and he threatens you with losing your job, or I don't know, it used to be years ago, they'd send you to Coventry.
Yeah.
They'd give you a really rubbish job to do, couldn't they? So you'd leave anyway.
Yeah, constructive dismissal.
I think they need the local ones and then the national ones to collate it all together.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought there, and thank you for it, Dave. I appreciate that. That's Dave in Staffordshire. This is clearly a very, very big issue. There are a lot of people, we've been talking about this for some time now, really since Elon Musk put out those tweets about just over a week ago, actually, and there have been elements of the media which have really tried not to discuss this. We have discussed it the whole way through. We'll continue to discuss it if you want to. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's hear from Scott in Essex. Scott, I think it's Shamiha Begum you want to talk about. Tell me your thoughts on Shamiha Begum. And this suggestion, it's on the front page of the Times today, that Sebastian Gorka, who is the counter-terror chief deputy assistant to the President-elect Donald Trump, he has said that Starmer's government must honour its commitment to the international fight against ISIS by taking back dozens of Britons in limbo in northeast Syria, including Shamiha Begum. Scott, what do you make of that?
Well, first off, I try to think of this individual as little as possible, as she thinks as little as possible about Britain. But there was some videos floating around of some police officers explaining why they never got involved in the atrocities of all these rape gangs. And there was a letter that came out of Parliament, specifically 10 Downing Street. It was a Prime Minister that sent the letter. I won't go into the name, as basically I think people should find this out for themselves. But the letter stated these girls, these white middle-class girls, had made a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, I know you're referring to comments made by Gordon Brown previously when he was Prime Minister. This is certainly part of the debate and the arguments that have been around in the last 10 days or so.
Well, then this lady abroad, hasn't she made her lifestyle choice? And shouldn't we respect her lifestyle choice of going to that country and fighting against our people?
What if her lifestyle choice? What if her lifestyle choice, Scott, is that she wants to come back to the UK?
What about the lifestyle choice of the very young white middle class children who would love their lifestyle to be returned to what it should have been before all of this started? They're never going to get a chance to have anything restored, and our MPs have shown quite clearly they couldn't care less.
Scott, thanks for your opinion. I appreciate that. That's Scott in Essex there. Thanks also to Leon, who's been in touch with a very nice message, who says, I would just like to say that you're a great presenter. You seem to genuinely care. It's a pleasure to watch your shows. Cheers, Leon in Stafford. Leon, thank you very much for that. Really warmed the cockles of my heart to receive that. I appreciate that. And thank you to Bill, who says, I'm from Telford. I'm appalled that my local MP abstained, as did two-tier Keir and half the cabinet. Unbelievable. He told his MPs to vote against, and then he abstained. Words fail me. Well, often they just don't turn up for the vote because they have such a big majority that they don't feel they need to. But certainly in Parliament today, in the House of Commons, the Conservatives had an urgent question on the economy. Mel Stride is the shadow Chancellor, and he, of course, ran to be leader of the Conservative Party. He came 6th. Mel Stride is, of course, a man rather than a woman, and he had this message for Rachel Reeves, who didn't turn up. In fact, she sent her deputy, and Mel Stride was wondering, quite reasonably, where's the Chancellor?
Where is the Chancellor? It is a bitter regret that at this difficult time of these serious issues, she herself is nowhere to be seen. Mr. Speaker, in the last 48 hours, borrowing costs have reached a 27-year high, and it is the Chancellor's decisions that have led us here.
That's Mel Stride there, the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. He tabled what's called an urgent question. The opposition parties can do this and the government always has to respond. It's always a bit of a scramble. I remember when I was in government for 3.5 years, we often got UQs, as they're called, urgent questions, and you have literally about 2 hours. First of all, they table the urgent question, then the Speaker decides whether the urgent question is actually going to be answered or not, and then you've got to work out who answers it and all the rest of it. It's a big issue. The Chancellor failed to show up to answer the urgent question. She decided her deputy, Darren Jones, was going to be there, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Maybe she had really good reasons for not being there, but I just wonder what they were. I don't think we've been told. In her place, as I say, was Darren Jones. He defended Labour's record.
He talked about the debt burden this country has. Maybe we should just reflect a little as to why we have so much debt. It's because pre-pandemic, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the burden of debt inherited by this government from the party opposite from 2010 onwards, why did the last government have to borrow so much money every single month, not just to invest, but to pay the day-to-day bills? Because of an absolute failure to get growth into the economy. They could not make the numbers add up. They've stacked up the country's credit card. They've left it to this party to deal with, and we are going to deal with it. That is why these fiscal rules are non-negotiable. That is why public spending will be within the numbers set out at the budget. We're starting the spending review now. It will conclude in June. Public services will have to live within their means. The Chancellor has been very, very clear about that. And that's why, with this government, you get economic stability, absolute clarity on public spending, and that is why the British people trust this party and booted that lot out of office.
Darren Jones there, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, basically the Deputy Chancellor, answering that question. Bill isn't fleet and says, one national inquiry into Muslim rape gangs or 52 plus individual inquiries. Come on, Peter, for goodness sake. If 52 plus local requirements for inquiries doesn't equal a national inquiry, what does? Well, we'll continue to debate this. It's a big issue. I'm going to be on tomorrow between 4 and 7, but between now and then, in fact, between the other side of the news and 10 o'clock, is the giant amongst men. It is Kevin O'Sullivan. Hello, Kevin. What's coming up in your programme?
I'll tell you what I'm worried about. So this new initiative by Keir Starmer, his latest Smash the Gangs initiative.
Can you say that again?
So they smash the gangs.
Thank you.
They keep coming up, this is prosecuting people who haven't been prosecuted.
Yes. Why not just prosecute them in the first place?
Yeah, you've got to prosecute people before you start closing down their bank accounts. Who's going to decide whose bank accounts get closed down?
Also, surely if you're a criminal, surely this is my problem with this story. Yeah, surely if you're a criminal, you're going to hide the bank accounts.
It's not going to work. It's a ridiculous idea anyway. But I'm worried about, they've done this before, when they said, was it a couple of weeks ago, we're going to close people's laptops down.
Yeah.
Now, who's going to decide who you're going to do this with? Now, I thought in this country, it being a free Western country, we had the rule of law. What you've got here is typical socialist totalitarianism, authoritarianism. The government will decide whether you're guilty. No court case, nothing, will then close your bank account. That is sinister. That is worrying. So we'll talk about that. But as you quite rightly say, Peter, at the end of the day, the real joke about it is it's not going to work. These criminals will have hidden their bank accounts. Don't be ridiculous. Also, we're going to talk about some of the grooming gang